Almighty God, humbly acknowledging our need for your guidance in all things, and laying aside all private and personal interests, we ask that you grant that we may conduct the affairs of this House and of our country to the glory of your holy name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the honour of the Queen, and the public welfare, peace and tranquillity of New Zealand. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Honourable members, I'm sure that members would wish to welcome members of the Kuwait-New Zealand Parliamentary Friendship Group, led by Dr. Khalil Abdullah Ali, present in the gallery. The Honourable Simon Bridges.
Speaker, when the House resumes on Tuesday 11 October, the Government will look to complete the committee stages of a number of bills on the order paper and the third reading of what was formerly the Judicature Modernisation Bill, presently on the order paper as items 24 to 46, starting with the Senior Courts Bill.
Chris Hipkins.
I wonder whether the acting leader of the House can confirm that the Government intends to take urgency to deal with the critical issue of the electrifying carpet that seems to be bedeviling the Minister in his office.
Speaker.
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
How very droll. No, we're not doing it.
A petition has been delivered to the Clerk for presentation.
Petition of Susie Purkis and Philip Coles, requesting that the House note that 3,416 people have signed a petition requesting that there should be an immediate reinstatement of a full complement of frontline police officers at the Cambridge Police Station.
That petition stands referred to a select committee allocated by the Clerk. Ministers have delivered papers.
Callaghan Innovation Annual Report 2016. New Zealand Foreign Affairs and Trade Strategic Intentions 2016 to 2020.
And I present the Annual Report 2015-16 of the Controller and Auditor General. Those papers are published under the authority of the House. Select committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Report of the Government Administration Committee on the Charities Amendment Bill. Report of the Health Committee on the petition of Lisa Marie Renwick and 11,085 others and the petition of the Honourable Annette King. Report of the Local Government and Environment Committee on the report of the Controller and Auditor General, Principles for Effectively Co-Governing Natural Resources.
The bill is set down for second reading. The report on the report of the Controller and Auditor General is set down for consideration. The Clerk has been informed of the introduction of bills.
Electoral Amendment Bill, Introduction. Private International Law, Choice of Law in Tort Bill, Introduction.
Those bills are set down for first reading. The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1 in the name of Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is the Minister of Finance. What reports has he received on the performance of mixed ownership electricity companies since their partial sale?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, Treasury advises me that in the 5 years before the Government sold a minority stake in 3 state-owned electricity companies, Mighty River Power, Meridian Energy and Genesis, the combined dividends averaged $365 million a year. In the 3 years since, the average is $442 million a year. In other words, the Crown has received more in dividends owning 49% of the companies than it did when it owed 100% of the companies.
Supplementary, Speaker.
Supplementary question, Ian McKelvey.
What other benefits has the partial sale of state-owned electricity companies delivered for New Zealanders?
The Order. The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the part sale raised $4.3 billion. This money has been invested in schools, hospitals, the Canterbury rebuild, delivering better education, healthcare and transport infrastructure. And because we've been able to finance those things out of the proceeds of the sale, New Zealand, we have been able to reduce New Zealand's indebtedness.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Ian McKelvey.
Has the part sale of state-owned electricity companies led to an escalation in power prices?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, that's a very good question, because at the time there was assertions that the sale of the companies would drive prices up. In fact, since the first company was listed in May 2013, the energy component of electricity prices has increased by less than the rate of inflation. That is, the prices increased by 2% when inflation was 2.5%. In fact, in the year to March, the average cost of electricity paid by consumers fell for the first time in 15 years. That's in sharp contrast to under the previous government, where prices rose around 70%.
Order. Order.
Supplementary,
Supplementary question, Ian McKelvey.
What safeguards are in place to protect the public interest in power companies?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the conditions on which the sale were made were set in order to protect the public interest, and that is that the government maintain a majority shareholding, that New Zealand investors will be at the front of the queue for buying shares, and that the capital freed up would be used to fund new public assets and enable the government to build infrastructure without increasing debt. Those conditions have been met.
Question number 2. Order. Order. Question number 2, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, is it correct that real disposable income per capita grew by 0.5% on average in the last year, according to the latest Statistics New Zealand data? And does he think this represents working New Zealanders getting a fair share of economic growth? You should just ask for answers.
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the answer to the first question is yes, and the answer to the second question is that that doesn't measure whether workers are getting a fair share of economic growth. Real disposable income includes returns on capital, international transfers, and is subject to changes in the terms of trade. What's more important for workers is actually a different measure, and that is wages. It's called wages. On these measures, families are getting a fair share of economic growth. In the last year, wages increased 2%, compared to inflation of just 0.4%. In fact, real take-home pay for workers is increasing at 4 times the rate under this government as it did under the previous government.
Your question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
How can it be fair on working New Zealanders if economic growth really is tracking along at about 3%, that average wage rises have in fact been between 1.5% and 2% over the last year?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the measure GDP is measuring something different from wages, and wages is just a component of what makes up economic growth. In fact, real wages have been rising, and I know that the member finds that hard to believe, but even coming out of recession in 2019, New Zealand households have enjoyed the benefits of moderate but consistent increases in their real incomes.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
In light of that answer, can he confirm that low wage rises are in fact a trend, with average wage rises in New Zealand below 2% for the last 4 years?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, low, of course the question is low relative to what? In fact, relative to inflation, wage increases now are higher than when inflation was 5% under the previous government. Wages were going up at 5% then, and so was inflation. So in fact, there was zero real wage increases, and now real wages are going up somewhere between 1% and 2%.
Supplementary question, Tim McIndoe.
What trends can the minister report on increasing wages earned by workers, and by how much are wages increasing ahead of inflation?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, as I said earlier, wages are a pretty good measure. In fact, they're a better measure of what wages households are getting than per capita real national disposable income. Since the government was elected in 2008, wages have increased 25%. Inflation over that period has been just 12%. Wages are set to continue rising, with Treasury forecasting a further 8% increase over the next 4 years, and the average wage to around $63,000. And an economy that is growing around 2.5% to 3% with relatively low inflation will continue to deliver real wage increases.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why does he continue to deny the reality for many New Zealanders that they have had very modest wage increases alongside massively increased housing costs, today described by the Reserve Bank Governor as excessive, and a New Zealand income survey that shows 28% of New Zealanders, the highest percentage ever, paying more than a third of their income in housing costs?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, there is a debate to be had about the proportion of household incomes that are now spent on housing. And it stands to reason that if house prices are going up and some households are borrowing heavily, then the proportion that they spend on housing is rising. Or I might point out two things. On average, servicing costs for household debt are pretty similar, if not a bit lower than they were 4 or 5 years ago. And somewhat surprisingly, recent data about rents in Auckland say that rents in Auckland are not rising.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Tim McIndoe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How does New Zealand's growth in real disposable income per capita compare to Australia's?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, insofar as real disposable income is a measure that shows us what's happening in an economy, growth in New Zealand's real disposable income has exceeded that in Australia since 2012. If we look at growth in real disposable incomes, we can see the effects of Australia's mining boom between 2010 and 2013 and New Zealand's dairy boom between 2012 and 2015. But in fact, on average, New Zealand's has risen faster.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Will he listen to the economic commentator who said, quote, strong GDP growth will make little difference to average earners, and get on with addressing the housing costs that New Zealanders are facing and review the immigration settings which are holding down wage growth? Or has he stopped listening to himself?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, it would certainly be more intellectually uplifting than listening to the member. And occasionally I do have to listen to myself because sometimes other people don't always agree. But in fact, Mr Speaker, the fact is, underlying the member's anxiety is the data that consistently shows New Zealand has an economy growing at 2.5% to 3%, in fact currently at 3.5%. That puts it in the top 2 or 3 of the developed world for growth rates right now. And while the member is worried that that's not enough, the government is certainly not complacent, and we have a program of ongoing microeconomic reform to underpin further growth.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Doesn't he get it that the problem here is that working New Zealanders are not getting a fair share of that growth, especially when they are facing the kind of housing cost increases that that their debt-to-income ratios in households are the highest that they've ever been? And why won't he get on the side of working New Zealanders and help lift their wages?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, where I agree with the member is that among any number of measures of economic growth, what actually happens to household wages is a very important one. And the fact is, by historical standards, our households are seeing moderate and consistent increases. There's no data the member has referred to today that even measures whether it's the distribution of income across the economy or whether it's fair. Members just randomly picking statistics
Order.
and trying to tell us that tells us what's happening to workers.
Supplementary question, Tim McIntyre.
How does New Zealand's growth in GDP per capita under this government compare to growth in other OECD countries?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is yet another measure, along with measures of real wages that shows progress in the economy. The OECD data shows that since 2008, growth in New Zealand's GDP per capita is the 7th fastest among 35 countries. That is higher than GDP per capita growth in Australia, the US, the UK, Germany, Japan and the OECD average. By comparison, just to pick a random period, 1999 to 2008, instead of being 7th fastest among 35 OECD countries, New Zealand over that period was 20th fastest.
Order. Question number 3, Barbara Kuriger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Climate Change Issues and asks, how is the government helping New Zealanders better understand what action New Zealand is taking to tackle climate change?
Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Today I released this snapshot outlining all the action New Zealand is taking to tackle climate change. It highlights the significant work going on across central and local government as well as in the private sector. For example, we have programs in place to encourage foresters to plant 17 million trees by 2020 and to double the number of electric vehicles each year. Last year we invested $31 million into understanding climate change and its impacts. New Zealanders should be proud of what we have done and confident that we are up to the challenges ahead.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Barbara Kuriger.
Thank you. To the Minister, what is New Zealand contributing to the efforts to reduce emissions from agriculture?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
emissions from agriculture are a challenge for New Zealand, but that also means we have a fantastic opportunity to be world leaders in finding a scientific solution. We're a key player in the 46-country-strong Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, which is leading research about how to increase food production without growing emissions. And our farmers are already changing, and without some of the efficiency improvements that they have made, our agricultural emissions would have increased by 40% since 1990.
Supplementary question, Barbara Kuriger.
Thank you. To the Minister, what are the next steps for our action on climate change?
Mr.
The
Speaker.
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, we have got a lot to be proud of, but equally I think we've got a lot of work to do. In the next few weeks, we will ratify the Paris Agreement with the agreement of the House, locking in our ambitious targets for 2030. We're also working internationally to phase down the use of hydrofluorocarbons, which could cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 2% and are known to be really dangerous to the environment. Domestically, we have established or are about to establish technical advisory groups on adaptation, forestry and agricultural emissions. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand's up for the challenge.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister. Why does the pamphlet entitled New Zealand's Action on Climate Change fail to mention that New Zealand's emissions have increased 19% on her government's watch?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I clearly said in my answer to other questions, we have got challenges ahead and that we want to see ourselves reducing those emissions. On a per-head population, of course, that has reduced and would have gone up a lot higher if we hadn't been making the changes that we have.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Why does the pamphlet entitled New Zealand's Action on Climate Change fail to mention that the most recent MFE projection of our future emissions is that they will increase 96% if her government's policies remain unchanged?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
because as the back page clearly says, we are going to change. We need to do more. We're up for the challenge and we are going to bend that curve.
Question number 4, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Primary Industries and asks, Does he stand by his statement that there is no hard evidence to support the Director of Fisheries Management's claim that fish discarding is a systemic failure of the current system?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Minister, what I actually said in the House earlier this week regarding that comment by the Director of Fisheries Management is that dumping and discarding is an issue that successive governments have been trying to deal with and grapple with over a period of time. I added that...
Order. This is a question that's on notice. It's an important issue, and I don't want a continual barrage coming from the Honourable David Cunliffe. Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I added that the quota management system is now 30 years old. We have the operational review underway, and I am sure that through that process the necessary changes will be made.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Were ministers aware of the extent and seriousness of fish dumping before the Simmons report, which showed that more than double the amount of fish caught are dumped at sea? And if not, why not?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
On behalf of the Minister, what I can say on behalf of the Minister is that an independent review was commissioned into 3 fisheries compliance investigations because of concerns. The Heron report has given us a pathway forwards, and I'm unable to speculate as to what was known or not.
A point of order, James Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, my question was whether ministers were aware of the extent of fish dumping before the Simmons report, and that's quite a specific question. The minister didn't answer that.
Yeah, and then I might add the member went on and added something else to his question, so he actually asked 2 supplementary questions. But forgiving him for a minute on that, the ministers then answered that there were 3 reports that were made available, so they knew of the issue, and then went on to say she was unable to specifically answer the question you've asked. And I think on the occasion when we acknowledge it's a minister acting on behalf of another minister, that's satisfactory. Further supplementaries? Supplementary question?
Supplementary.
Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, when will the government act on a commission of inquiry into fisheries management called for by New Zealand First 3 months ago?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
On behalf of the Minister, I'm able to report that back in August last year, the Future of Fishing review was undertaken, and we know that that will address many issues in relation to this and the quota management system.
Supplementary question? Supplementary question, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, how can you trust a fisheries monitoring agency that is owned by commercial fishing companies to monitor themselves?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Mr. Speaker, there are currently there is a contract out for just 15 vessels under Snapper 1, and in fact the fisheries compliance people look at the evidence taken from the cameras on those vessels.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
How does the Minister think that the preliminary Operation Achilles report in July 2013, quote, found its way into the hands of industry, end quote, and how many other investigation reports have found their way into the hands of industry?
Again, there's 2 supplementary questions. The Minister can address either one. The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, I personally have no knowledge of the answer to the first question, therefore cannot answer that.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Will the Minister commit to an independent review of the quota management system in light of the recommendations of the revelations made in the Heron report?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Mr Speaker, I think on behalf of the Minister it's important that we understand that what we have within the Mike Heron QC report, which was an independent report, was looking at some compliance investigations to determine whether the processes were heading in the right direction. In fact, this report showed that in some cases they were flawed. The Ministry of Primary Industries Director General Martin Dunn has said that changes will be happening. It is regrettable that they were flawed. Changes will be happening. At the same time, quota management system is now 30 years old. It is time for a review, and we will be doing that review in good faith.
Question number 5. Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Tertiary Education, Skills and Employment. Does he agree with John Key, who said when announcing the Youth Guarantees policy that, quote, "The bottom line is this: the days of 16 and 17-year-olds being able to leave school and drift along aimlessly while being financially supported by the government are at an end," end quote?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, absolutely yes. The Youth Guarantee Scheme was introduced commencing in 2010 to address the problem of young people leaving school with low achievement and destined to be neat and in receipt of a benefit from age 18. It was significantly expanded in 2012 when the ineffective youth training program was absorbed into the scheme. The purpose of that change was to give the youth training students a stronger focus on educational achievement as well. It has been very effective in improving educational achievement at Level 2 NCEA. It is also, along with other programs, improving employment outcomes. More young people are achieving NCEA Level 2 than ever before, while young people aged 15 to 19 not in education, employment or training are at the lowest levels on record, while NEETs overall are back to pre-global financial crisis levels at, yes, September 2008, actually.
Question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question. Chris Hipkins.
Did the latest monitoring report of the policy find that participants in the fees-free scheme are more likely to end up on benefits after completing the program? If so, does he think that the days referred to by the Prime Minister over 8 years ago are now at an end?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, no. In terms of the fees-free side, there hasn't been a big increase in terms of employment of that 2012 cohort, but it is important to know that that report was done in 2014 and only takes into account the employment considerations for the 2012 cohort, which was the first year that it was transferred from youth training to youth guarantee. In terms of the educational achievement, we've seen a significant lift in that. In terms of the employment achievement, it's probably a little bit early, but we also want to see that lift over time.
Question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Did the evaluation find that the young people participating in the program were more or less likely to end up on a benefit as a result of participating in the program?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I understand it was about the same.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Has he read the line in the report that states, quote, "Any difference in outcomes between these groups can be attributed to the program"? If so, does he think that an additional 2,020 young people receiving benefits, 869 more NEETs and 440 fewer people in full employment are good outcomes?
Again, there's 2 supplementary questions there the Minister can address.
Well,
either.
Mr Speaker, what I know about that report is it actually underlines the increase in educational achievement at NCEA Level 2. And the member can try and ignore that if he wishes, but that is the primary aspiration of that scheme, is to lift NCEA Level 2 achievement, because we all know that if you get at least NCEA Level 2, you can do better in the future. In terms of employment, frankly, the member is way too early because it relates only to the first year of youth training. He should wait and see how it goes. And anyway, NEETs are now at their lowest level, 15 to 19, than they've ever been.
Supplementary question, Dr. Jan Yang.
Yeah,
what new steps is government taking to ensure more young people... Sorry, start again.
Yeah. Order. Order. Every member has a right to ask a question. Dr.
What
Daniel.
new steps is the government taking to ensure more young people are engaged in education and training?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, as indicated in the primary answer to this question, the government is making good progress in reducing the number of disengaged young people, with more young people achieving NCEA Level 2 than ever before, and NEET rates, particularly 15 to 19-year-olds, at the lowest percentage levels that we've ever had, right back till 1989. So we now see an opportunity to do more, and this week Education Minister Hekia Parata and I announced a new youth guarantee program, secondary tertiary program called Dual Pathways, alongside the other programs. This will allow students to be enrolled part-time both in secondary school at years 12 and 13 and part-time in either tertiary education or industry training. That will allow more young people to fully explore career options while they're still enrolled at school and get a head start on the skills employers are looking for. It's the latest in a number of programs which are serving to bring NEET levels to record lows.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
So is the Minister seriously arguing that if participation in the fees-free scheme increases a young person's likelihood of achieving NCEA Level 2, but increases also their likelihood of ending up on a benefit, that's a successful outcome?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, again, for the member's benefit, let me take him through the cohorts that are measured in that report. So those cohorts relate to 2010, 2011 and 2012. The 2012 cohort, for the first time, picked up the failing youth training scheme, which wasn't even delivering educational outcomes. It was delivering nothing. And that program came into Youth Guarantee in 2012. We now have the educational achievement to show for it. And we are also, through the NEET numbers, seeing the lowest numbers of 15 to 19 NEETs than we have ever seen since the series began in 1989.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
So is he seriously arguing that students are better off having participated in a program, being forced to participate in a program by the government, that makes them more likely to end up on a benefit at the end of it?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, well, firstly, nobody's forced to participate in the scheme. They're not forced to participate. Nobody is forced to participate in Youth Guarantees fees-free, but they are achieving educational outcomes at NCEA Level 2 that will last their entire lives. I think that's an excellent outcome for those young people, and the member can poo-poo it if he likes, but I know young people who are very proud of achieving Level 2 NCEA when they dropped out at school at 14, turned up at fees-free Youth Guarantee and now have their NCEA Level 2. To me, that's worth a lot for those students.
That's right.
Order. Order. Question number 6, Matt Ducey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Development and asks, what recent announcements has she made regarding support for children and young people in care or at risk of going into care?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, this morning I announced that legislation will be introduced to Parliament by the end of the year, which will propose new and amended principles to the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act 1989 in the critical areas of intensive intervention and care support services. These new principles will ensure better support for children and young people in care or at risk of going into care, and also increase support for families and caregivers. The current care and protection system is not meeting the needs of vulnerable children, and this new legislation will underpin two important aspects of the new operating model of the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, Oranga Tamariki.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Matt Ducey.
How do these new principles differ from the current principles in the Act?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker. We know that the current principles do not place enough focus on intervening early with the right level and type of response to address the impact of harm on a child and the future risk of harm. So the new principles support an early intervention response with a focus on safe, stable and loving care. It will also ensure that decisions made about the child or young person should reflect their views and input. The new principles will make it clear that where a child is removed and cannot be returned to their immediate family, decisions should be centred around the child or young person's best interests and understanding their views and needs. These changes to the fundamental principles of the Act are an integral part of the biggest overhaul of care and protection that this country has ever seen.
Supplementary question, Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, if Oranga Tamariki, the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, has no responsibility for reducing child poverty, does she genuinely believe it is instead the role of work and income, as she stated in her press statement last night?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, I have made it very clear for over a year and a half now, I don't know where that member's been, maybe under a rock somewhere, that the role of the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children, Oranga Tamariki, is to focus on the care and protection of those children who are either in state care or are at risk of state care. The hardship and difficulties faced by many other New Zealand children is a responsibility of all of government.
Supplementary question, Matt Ducey.
How were these new principles developed?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children, Oranga Tamariki, will be completely child-centred, and this has been reflected in the development of these principles. The revised principles reflect and incorporate feedback from the Youth Advisory Panel. This panel worked closely with the Expert Advisory Panel on their report and business case last year, and I want to acknowledge the valuable contribution of these young people. These amended principles also largely reflect feedback from the Children's Commissioner. The Youth Panel told me and told Parliament that we need to stop experimenting with their lives, and wherever possible we need to get it right first time. This government is committed to seeing this happen.
Question number 7, Julie Ann Genter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Transport. Does he stand by his statement that, quote, there will come a point of time where you can't just keep adding lanes to the motorway? And does he think that time has come for Auckland?
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
Mr Speaker, yes and no.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
Given that 50 years of motorway building hasn't fixed congestion in Auckland, why is his government still proposing to spend another $6.5 billion adding more lanes to Auckland motorways in the next 10 years, rather than building the rapid transit network that Aucklanders would like?
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
I think the member will find it wasn't me. In fact, it was officials from across both central and local government and people with independent expertise who determined that indicatively these are the sort of projects that will really get Auckland moving.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
So, can he confirm if a detailed business case was completed for the $1.85 billion East-West Link motorway when he announced it would be fast-tracked in January last year?
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
Mr Speaker, yes, well, that's a project that the government feels strongly needs to be done, and the reason for that is because that is a message we are getting consistently from across the spectrum in Auckland as a project that will really get Auckland moving, and in particular freight and industry moving in the biggest, busiest industrial area within New Zealand.
Point of order.
Point of order, Julie Ann Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question was pretty straight. It asked if he could confirm if a detailed business case was completed for this project.
No. It then went on to mention the fact the project was fast-tracked. They were the words the member used, so yeah, I could accept the member has addressed that, but I think when I consider the first part of your question, was there a detailed business case, the Minister hasn't addressed that. I'll allow the member to repeat the question.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just to assist the order of the House, I think if you look at the Hansard, the Minister's first word was yes, so he did answer the question.
Order, and I don't need that sort of help from Mr Prosser. So, supplementary question, Julianne Genter.
Supplementary.
Order.
Supplementary. Can the Minister confirm if a detailed business case was completed for the East-West Link motorway when he announced it would be fast-tracked?
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
Mr Speaker, yes, I think as the member knows, because she's sent in about 50,000 OAAs in this issue, we have done very detailed investigations on this issue, gone through a range of options in great detail, and feel very confident we've come out with the best long-term project here.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Julianne Genter.
Well, given that a detailed business case hasn't been completed for the East-West Link, is the government now admitting that it's not using objective expertise to inform which projects are going to be prioritised in the next 10 years in Auckland?
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
Mr Speaker, I think the member has missed the tenor of my last question. As I say, we've done very detailed, the Transport Agency, very detailed investigations in relation to the East-West project, and we feel very confident it's the right project, it's a project that Auckland wants, and I also make quite clear we have many other plans in place to keep Auckland moving.
Supplementary question, Julianne Genter.
Does the Minister understand that there's an opportunity cost to spending billions of dollars on additional motorway lanes? And if that money was used on high-capacity busways and railways first, it would actually help more Aucklanders get around not only on public transport, but on the roads that already exist.
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
I think the member's exactly right. That's why we've set up ATAP, so that in an evidence-based way we are going through and determining the projects that represent the best value for money to deal with congestion. That includes a wide range of projects in public transport, but also in arterial roads, motorways and the like, because they all combined represent the best value to deal with Auckland's transport issues.
Question number 8.
Point of order.
Point of order, Kelvin Davis.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to hold my question over until the Minister of Māori Development is available to answer.
Leave is sought for that course of action. Is there any objection? There is objection. Kelvin Davis.
To the Minister for Māori Development, does he believe that the lives of Māori have improved during his time as Minister for Māori Development?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Kelvin Davis.
How have Māori lives improved with the Māori home ownership rate plummeting to just 28% under his watch and face a rate of homelessness more than 5 times greater than the European population?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, the Māori Housing Network provides funding of approximately $17.6 million per annum for housing projects aimed at improving the quality and affordability of homes as well as increasing the number of whare available. The Māori Housing Network is supporting 87 projects around the motu. These projects include helping to repair 243 whānau homes, build 42 new affordable homes, support the provision of emergency housing facilities and provide infrastructure for 116 houses, making a difference, and that's what the focus is on.
Why has his
supplementary question, Kelvin Davis.
Why has his Kāinga Whenua scheme failed so dramatically to build houses, given fewer than 5 loans are being given out each year?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
On behalf of the Minister of Māori Development, they're currently running projects throughout the country and going around and speaking at different events to make sure that they're talking to people about how they might be working. We will be seeing that number increase.
Does he think his
supplementary question, Kelvin Davis.
Does he think his Māori Housing Network is really going to help Māori into homes when it organised more workshops last year than it built houses?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Māori Development, the whole idea is to be talking to people and making sure that the projects do fit with what they want locally and what they need. Mr Speaker, the answer to that question is a definite yes.
Supplementary. Does he accept...
Order. Supplementary question, Kelvin Davis.
Does he accept he has overseen some of the worst declines for Māori home ownership, children living in cars, and been a minister in a government that his co-leader called a slumlord?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think the Minister of Māori Development is making, certainly on behalf of him, is making huge inroads when it comes to Māori housing and how that can be done. From Te Whenua land to how they are actually pulling that together, to the loans that are available, to making sure that our young people do have access. I think it's making progress.
Supplementary question, Derek Ball.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How have the lives of Maori improved if Te Puna Kōkiri and Whānau Ora commissioning agencies...
Order. I require substantially less interference from my right-hand side. The member can start his question again.
How have the lives of Māori improved if Te Puna Kōkiri and Whānau Ora commissioning agencies have exited almost 30 of the 50 contracts nationwide that were transferred from the Ministry of Social Development, while he keeps the funding and enjoys a slush fund of almost $3 million?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Well, Mr Speaker, that member has made his views pretty clear in this House many times on how he sees Whānau Ora operating. Mr Speaker, on this, certainly on behalf of the Minister of Māori Development, the reality is that it showed that more than 11,500 whānau were being supported to improve achievements across their lives. Mr Speaker, this is about working alongside Māori in their homes, in their communities, and seeing them be aspirational and working towards success, not about actually holding funds close to them and not making a difference.
Question number 9, Alfred Nato.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister for Pacific Peoples, what recent announcement has he made about supporting young Pacifica people into sustainable employment, education and training?
Good Speaker.
The Honourable Pesata Sam Lottawinga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last Friday I relaunched the Pacific Employment Support Service Scheme in Manukau. This scheme focuses on getting young Pacific people into employment, education and training. I'm delighted that a further $4.6 million has been allocated to run the program for the next 4 years. 4 providers will work together across Auckland and Hamilton, and the program expects to provide essential support to get 2,000 young Pacific people into work or training over the next 4 years.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Alfred Nato.
What evidence is there that the scheme is truly making a difference?
Speaker.
The Honourable Pesata Sam Lottawinga.
The evaluation of the pilot program showed over 1,400 young Pacific people have already benefited from the scheme since it began as a pilot. Of those, over 81% were placed into work or training schemes. It was clearly evident from speakers last Friday that this program makes a real difference for these young Pacific people and their families. It does this by motivating, matching and training young people to give them the support and the confidence that they need to succeed in the workplace and in their training programs.
Supplementary question, Sua Williams-Theo.
My question, supplementary to the Minister. Are Pacific parents correct that his government promised a brighter future, but instead what they got was high youth unemployment? And I quote, almost a quarter of Pacific students reported that their parents worry about not having enough food, and 36% said someone at home sleeps in a room not designated for sleeping, that is garage or living room, as highlighted in the Healthy Wellbeing of Pacific Youth report released today.
The Honourable Pesata Sam Lottawinga.
Mr Speaker, the report by Auckland Uni Services showed that Pacific young people are actually making good progress. Recent results show that they've improved family and school relationships, significant reductions in substance abuse and improved educational goals.
Question number 10, Derek Ball.
Thank you, sir. To the Minister of Local Governments, does he stand by all his statements?
The Honourable Pesata Sam Lottawinga.
Yes, in the context in which they were made.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Derek Ball.
Does he stand by his statement to the Local Government Commission in March this year that, quote, what you're going to get is models that are appropriate for the individual regions. We're not going to impose this from Wellington. There's no one-size-fits-all, end quote.
The Honourable Pesatara Sam Lotawinga.
Yes, I do.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Derek Ball.
If that's the case, will he now amend the Local Government Act 2002 to reflect the race-based appointments incorporated into the Taranaki Iwi Claims Settlement Bill, which will force the Taranaki Regional Council to include 6 unelected iwi representatives?
The Honourable Pesatara Sam Lotawinga.
Well, Mr Speaker, I haven't made any announcements on that bill. I'm neither responsible for that bill.
Supplementary question, Derek Ball.
Would he agree that it is fair and democratic to force a council to include 6 members based on race of a council that were democratically elected and hold the same status and remuneration and expenses? If so, why?
The Honourable Pesatara
That's a
Sam Lotawinga.
hypothetical question, sir. That's a hypothetical question I don't have to answer.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order. Order.
This is hardly a hypothetical
Order.
question.
Order. I can't hear the point of order. Point of order.
This is hardly a hypothetical question, sir. I can ask it again if the Minister wants to.
Order. No, the Minister's interpreted it as a hypothetical question. It was a difficult question. Sit, member of your seat. It was a difficult question for me to write down because it was a fairly lengthy question, but that's the answer the Minister's given, and when I consider the generality of the primary question, we will move forward. Supplementary question, Derek Ball.
Why is the government ignoring a referendum in the New Plymouth area last May where 83% opposed race-based appointments to local government by now ramming 6 non-elected appointments down Taranakians' throats?
That's right. The Honourable Pesatara Sam Lotawinga.
Well, no, sir, that we're not ignoring that referendum held last year. That's not true. No, we're not.
Question, order. Question number 11, Dr. Parmjeet Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. How will small businesses benefit from this government's move to reduce the time it takes to complete business surveys?
Speaker.
The Honourable Craig Foss.
Mr. Speaker, under this government, Statistics New Zealand is taking yet another step towards being digital by default and open by default by moving 3 more business surveys online. Small businesses will now save time by completing 4 surveys: the Agricultural Production Survey, the Economic Survey of Manufacturing, the Quarterly Wholesale Trade Survey and Quarterly Business Survey, all online. An additional 15 business surveys will be available to be completed online by mid-2017, and our aim is to have all business surveys online in 2018. Mr. Speaker, small businesses will continue to benefit from the reduced time taken to fill out these surveys, but also contributing their data to more information, more informed markets across New Zealand.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Dr. Parmjeet Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as making it easier to complete business surveys, what steps is the government taking to reduce the number of small businesses who have to complete a business survey?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Craig Foss.
Mr. Speaker, the number of businesses surveyed over recent years has reduced from 268,000 businesses to 72,000 businesses. The biggest reductions have been amongst small businesses. This has been made possible as Stats New Zealand has made better use of administrative data collected by other organisations across government. I expect Stats New Zealand to look for further opportunities for further reductions. This is great news for many small business owners across New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, and operators who, of course, can now spend less time on administration and more time on their business.
Question number 12, the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Primary Industries. Does he stand by all his statements?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, yes, in the context they were given. In particular, I stand by my statement that yesterday's announcement was great news for dairy farmers, with Fonterra raising their forecast payout to well above break-even for most farmers. I note this statement contrasts with some members who've previously expressed more dire forecasts for that industry.
Order.
Supplementary, Mr.
Supplementary
Speaker.
question, the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
To the Minister, does he stand by his statement that the tender process for monitoring commercial fishing was, quote, was very open and transparent process, unquote? If so, what is open or transparent about letting the commercial fishing industry, which is about to be monitored, to veto any firm it didn't like?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, I stand by my statements on that issue.
Supplementary, Mr.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Damien
Who
O'Connor.
does the Minister think is more likely to get vetoed by the commercial fishing industry? A company owned by the commercial fishing industry, or B, the firm that discovered systemic fish dumping by commercial fishing companies?
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
On behalf of the Minister, if you are asking me to second-guess something the commercial fishing industry would do, why doesn't the member ask them himself?
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Why did the Minister's officials try to stitch up the tender process so the commercial fishing industry would be monitoring itself?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
On behalf of the Minister, I reject the assertion in the member's question.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Does the Minister think New Zealand's international export reputation is at risk when the integrity of MPI and the fishing industry are under question?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
On behalf of the Minister, quite the contrary. I think what the international industry will see is that we have had an independent inquiry into our fisheries compliance investigations, that we have taken on the chin that in the case of one of them it was flawed, that we have said that we have a total commitment to changing the processes, the internal processes that have brought this about, and that in fact we are not hiding the fact that there has been mistakes made.
Good. And that concludes questions for oral answer. I call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Interrupted debate on the second reading of Rangitane o Manawatu Claims Settlement Bill.
And when this debate was, when the legislation was being debated in the House prior to the lunch break, Adrian Ruruafi has the call. He has 5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Adrian Ruruafi.
Tēnā tātou o te whare nei. Before the lunch break, I was talking about the disappointment that Rangitane will be feeling about not having their settlement bill read for a third time tomorrow. Sir, I also spoke about the whare that stands, the house that stands on Te Hotu Manawa o Rangitane o Manawatu Marae, the name of which is Tūturu Pūmo. Within Tūturu Pūmo is a carving of some gifts, representing gifts that were given from Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Rātana to Michael Joseph Savage. Within Aroha mai koutou mai kōrero ana I tēnei wā. Mr. Speaker, and within that, that carving, it is incomplete because it was the view of the people of Rangitane that their addressing of their treaty settlement, the breaches to the treaty, have not yet been settled. And so they will be immensely disappointed.
Order, I apologise for interrupting the member. Can I ask for substantially less conversations taking part? This is important legislation, certainly of interest to a large number of people in the gallery, and I expect more respect to be shown from members. If they want conversations to occur, move to the lobbies. I apologise for interrupting the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, within Tūturu Pūmo, there is an unfinished carving. It represents an unfinished business about the breaches to the treaty that Rangitane o Manawatu have suffered. The delaying of the third reading will delay the completion of those taonga within that whare. I want to acknowledge the presence of those from Rangitane o Manawatu and thank them for their patience. The delay has nothing to do with any action that Rangitane or Manawatu have taken. In fact, quite the contrary. Sir, I don't want to take up any more of the House's time except to say this is long overdue. It is another step towards the completion of those taonga in that House. Nō reira, anei anō te mihi ake ki ngā uri o Rangitane o Manawatu. Tēnei a hau tō koutou whanaunga tuku mihi atu ki a koutou. Kia kaha, kia mai, ki roto I ēnei āhuatanga. Te whakatau I tō koutou kremi, nō reira tēnā koutou katoa.
I call Marama Fox.
A tēnā koe te mane whakawā, nei te mihi atu ki a koe ōtira ki te whare. Kia koutou o ku whanaunga e noho nei, e mātakitaki nei, e nāneke hanga o Paremata, mai te wā pātaitai, mai te pōhiri tata, taino atu ki te mutunga o tēnei wahanga ma koutou, nei te mihi atu ki a koutou. O ku pau o kurahi e hui a kanohi nei, tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou. Kai te tuku whakaro ki a rātou, koe mate mai I ngā tau kua hipa atu, a rātou I tīmata te kawe e tēnei haerenga, a rātou I tīmata te whawhai mo te whenua, e hari te mea nā rātou anake engari kei te pirangi au te mihi atu ki a mātua rangi Haruru, Fitzgerald, mātua tāne nui a rangi te awe awe, whaia kura te rangi Baker, whaia Ruth Harris, and whaia Kararaina Tate. I te tīmatanga o tēnei mahi, ora katoa rātou. Ora katoa rātou. Tainu atu ki tēnei rangi, ko tātou te hunga ora nei, ko tātou te hunga e tūtuki nei I o rātou nā wawata, a te whawhai tonu, te kawe tonu I tēnei o Ngātaki. Nā reira kei te mihi. He uri tēnei o Rangitāne ki te Wairarapa, he uri tēnei o Ngāti Kahungunu hoki. Ka re taia te whakawehe. Iai ki tāku kaumātua, tātou whanaunga Onko Kuki. Ko era tāna ki au. He waiwai tau mārama kairoto I ngā waka erua. Ka re taia te pēhea. Nā reira, kai te pirangi au te tuku mihi atu ki ai e tēnei wā aha ko te Manawatu tēnā, whanaunga katoa tātou ki tā te Wairarapa, nā reira ka mihi. Tēnei rohe o Manawatu ka tīmata ki te awa, e whai haere I te awa, taino ki Rangitikei, Tararua, Ruahine, tai atu ki te tai hauauru, me te Manawatu, te ngutu awa o Manawatu. Mr. Speaker, ka huri pēr ki te reo prawa ma tātou katoa ki a mārama ai tātou. Mr. Speaker, as with many treaty settlements, those who begin the journey are not always the ones who end the journey. Those who begin the journey to right the wrongs of the past dedicate their lives to ensuring that their people have a better future. Our whānau who take up the struggle in the whawhai, they do so not for themselves, but for their descendants, those who are still yet to come, for their tamariki, mukapuna, ngāuri whakaheke. And so we've already acknowledged those who have lost the struggle along the way and are not here kanohi, but are here wairua tēnei rangi. Mr. Speaker, in the submission from Rangitane o Manawatu Settlement Trust, they acknowledge the recent passing as well of Ngāti Mairehau Hapu representative Pōtaka Tate in April of this year. His loss is undoubtedly felt the most by his beloved wife and children, and we read how Pōtaka was a man steeped in his tikanga and cultural practices, which were part of his daily life. Like many others, he was active in the affairs of his hapu from a very early age. His mother, Kararaina Tate, was a founding member of Tāne Nui Arangi Manawatu Incorporated and a negotiator for the Rangitane o Manawatu treaty claims until her passing in 2012. Paul Tucker, a speaker at the Rangitane o Manawatu deed of settlement signing and was there and was genuinely looking forward to the future of Rangitane o Manawatu, and he brought his own sense of passion. His loss, like the others, is still keenly felt. Rangitane o Manawatu has been working towards settlement with the Crown since 1998. 1998, when Tāne Nuiarangi Manawatu Incorporated gained a mandate to represent the iwi in negotiations. From 1859 to 1866, Crown purchase of over 500,000 acres of land in which Rangitane o Manawatu had customary interests was taken. On July 1998, the Crown and Rangitane o Manawatu signed terms of negotiation, which brings us to this point. And it is with a heavy heart again today that we acknowledge that we are unable to succeed or to progress to the third reading, which would have happened tomorrow. It's been well canvassed. We are well aware of the political game playing that has ensued, which has put this on hold. And I apologise on behalf of this House to our whānau that the game playing of this House has interrupted what has been a long and determined struggle to come to your final day, iwi o Rangitane o Manawatu, where we could put these things aside and start to move on. One of the things we discussed at length and heard submissions from was around the Tangi Moana Crown Forest licence land and 113 to 117 Fitzherbert Avenue, Barmers North, which will now be transferred to Rangitane o Manawatu on the settlement date. And we heard people making cross claims in the area, and some of the debate that ensued was about who lives there now, who lived there when, where is Ahika? And it reminded me, in fact, of the debate that happened often from the Crown when they came and settled, or from settlers and the Crown when they came and settled this land. If you don't live on it, it can't be yours. If it doesn't surround your house, then it's free for us to have. And so that was the similar debate that happened for the Crown Forest area. But on settlement, Rangitane o Manawatu will have the option we'll get that, but we'll also have the option to purchase with a deferred selection period of 2 years from the settlement date, 10 sites within the Rangitane o Manawatu area of interest. And that again is somewhat dismaying to me, that actually the Crown can gift land for next to nothing to a university, an education institution, or a charity. But yet, when it comes to settlement, they negotiations ensue where you have to pay for that land to get it back after it was taken unjustly in the first place. So we come to this point, and in the spirit of trying to move on, Rangitane o Manawatu have taken up the challenge, Mr. Speaker, to settle now and to progress into the future and do all the things, all of the dreams, fulfill the aspirations of those who have not made it to this point, who have passed on in the struggle and the fight, and left it to those ākanohi, koutou, kai te ora tonu, ka tūtuki tēnei ki roto i a koutou nā ringa, kai roto i a koutou ringa, te tūtuki o a rātou nā wawata. Nā reira, oku whanaunga, harikoa taku nā kau te kitatu i a koutou katoa, e noho nei ki runga i ngā tūru o te whare. Nei te mihi atu ki a koutou, hihi ko te hinengaro, hihi ko te wairua, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa.
Māngai o te whare.
Mitiria Tūrei.
Tēnā koe te māngai
Tēnā koe.
o te whare, kia koutou huri noi te whare, tēnā koutou katoa. I tuatahi kamihio ki te Rangitane o Manawatu, tēnā koutou katoa. ko tuau mō ngā kākāre ki te kōrero i te pānuitanga tuarua o tēnei te piri rangitāne o Manawatu claims. Nō Ngā Te Kahungunu ki Wairarapa, Ati Haunui, a Paparangi, me Rangitāne. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Richard Turei, tōku matua Engari, kua hina ia I roto I ngā ringaringa o ngā atua Nainei. So my dad, Richard, was a farm labourer who was born and raised as a young man at Papuai, but who lived his adult life in Palmerston North. And his whole life he was a labourer, he was a farm labourer. So he did everything from deer hunting to farm labouring, working on all over the Manawatu. He worked all the way from Martin down to Opiki, from Tangi Moana to Pohongana. We, as a whānau, as a family, small family, working class Māori family, lived all over the Manawatu area our whole lives. And this was a place where there was great wealth. All around us, there was great wealth. None of it belonged to anybody that we ever knew. We could see it. We were working the land from which that wealth and privilege was generated. None of it ever belonged to anybody that we ever knew, not to our whānau, not to our hapu. We didn't know. And it really is difficult, I think, to describe, although people do try, and some perhaps more eloquently than me will be able to, what it's like to grow up in a place where you belong in your bones. You know that when you walk on the ground, that ground is in your blood. But for some reason, you are totally disassociated from it. You have been dispossessed from it. So you can feel that dispossession in your life, and you can see the effects of that dispossession, but you can't describe it. You can't explain why you feel that way. You just know that there is this strange screen between you and the land that you belong to. In an environment like that, and with the description of the dispossession of Rangitane from their land, you can see that it's why it's so difficult to describe. There are no people to say, did you wrong? You can't say this person or that person hurt your whānau or took this from you. You can't describe it in terms of warfare and violence because, as we know in this case in particular and elsewhere around the country, the dispossession occurred as a matter of law and a matter of economics, and proved to us all, that old adage, that the pen truly is mightier than the sword. Because it was through the pen that 500,000 acres was taken from Rangitane. 500,000 acres taken from this people over a long period of time, and with deal after deal and a little bit of trading here and a little bit of misinformation there, all done through strokes over years and years and generations with the strokes of a pen. And what it does then is it leaves those at the end of that in a world with feeling like there is no place to stand. That is kind of what it feels like. So I'm very pleased to stand here and support this settlement bill, because I know how that feels to be so disassociated from this land that is being talked about tonight. And, you know, we are disappointed that, as it's been said before, it's reparation, not compensation, for the 500,000 acres taken. We are overwhelmed by the generosity of the iwi in accepting this settlement, knowing how much was lost and how little is being returned. And we are enormously proud of those who have fought in this settlement for decades to have some resolution of the loss that was felt. So, I don't want to speak for too long, Mr. Speaker, because we need to get the settlements done so that people can get on. But it is really important that perhaps after this, the people of Manawatu, of Palmerston North and all the surrounding rural towns in that area really get to understand the settlement and the history of the settlement, so they understand the ground that they are standing on. And that might make it easier for the kids like me in the future who will really truly believe that they belong there, really truly understand that this is the land that they belong to, and feel that they truly have a place to stand. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Nuk Korako.
Tēnā koe i te mana whakawā. A tēnā rā koto nā pūwaitaka o tō tātou matua tīpuna. E nā manuhiri atu raki. Kura hopa waka. Ruahene o Tararua Moka. Rangitānei o Manawatu. A tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. E mauri mai e whakaako ki te kaupapa e nunui. Nō reira, nau mahara mai whakatau mai o te whare paramata. Nō reira e mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed my pleasure to take this call for the second reading of the Rangitānei o Manawatu Claim Settlement Bill. It's also a privilege to stand as the Chair of the Māori Affairs Select Committee and to have this opportunity to do the second reading of this Rangitānei o Manawatu Treaty Settlement Bill. What I'd like to do is to go through a number of the processes and a number of the take actually that was discussed at the Māori Affairs Select Committee following the first reading, and then moving it through to scrutinising the bill, and then seeking numbers or seeking the information from iwi and also non-Māori as well. And what I want to highlight, one part of it, is that we received submissions on this bill. There were 9 of them. And we went to Palmerston North to hear 5 of the submissions. The majority of the submissions were in support of the deed of settlement. And what we do note, though, that there was a couple that actually did not agree with the settlement. However, I think one of the concerns of that was about the inclusion of Ngāti Tauira, hapu, in the claimant definition. While the reconfirmed mandate in 2007 clarified the Ngāti Tauira members were included in the settlement that ascended from Tāne Nui Arangi, Ngāti Apa submitted that they should not be included as they are Ngāti Apa hapu. The Select Committee, we took a view that while Ngāti Tauira's strongest links were definitely with Ngāti Apa, they have whakapapa, they have social and political links to both. And we agreed that it is appropriate that Ngāti Tauira and the participation part in the Rangitānei o Manawatu settlement is dependent on them having a descendant from Rangitānei or Manawatu ancestor. So that was where we actually discussed that and looked at that and agreed that that should be the case moving forward. We also considered concerns from 2 overlapping groups, Rangitānei o Wairapa and Rangitānei o Tāmaki Nui Arua. And they expressed their opposition to the area of interest defined by Rangitānei or Manawatu. While we recognise that the other 2 groups may have interests in the same area, we also noted that it is not an exclusive area of claim. And it is not unusual for iwi to have overlapping interests in different areas. And also the other part of this was that there was no exclusive redress provided in the contested area. So that was really, what came out of that actual submission. Another area of disagreement between the iwi was the Tangimoana Crown Forest licence land, which is included in the settlement as a commercial redress. E te mana whakawā, Ngāti Kaupata claim that this forest is part of the ancestral rohe. This settlement would remove any possibility of Ngāti Kaupata claiming Tangi Moana forest in the future. And so we noted that this area is the only Crown forest land within the area of interest for the settlement. However, other iwi with overlapping interests have other Crown forest land available for the settlement and within that area of interest. So the primary purpose of commercial redress is to re-establish an iwi's economic base. So we were satisfied that enough Crown land actually remains available for the future settlements in that particular area. Finally, some of the submitters from Ngāti Raukawa submitted that their interests overlap with Rangitane or Manawatu and that they will be prejudiced by the exclusive redress provided to Rangitane or Manawatu. But we understand that there is already in place an amendment to the settlement to address the concerns of Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga. There is also sufficient land remaining again to provide that actual commercial redress. And the only other amendments we did, sir, was that we recommended, as the results of surveys of the redress sites, requiring updates for the legal descriptions contained in the bill. Mr. Speaker, I just want to take this opportunity to again acknowledge the iwi of Rangitane o Manawatu and to mihi to you for coming here today to hear your second reading. And I'm looking forward to working through with the Māori Affairs Select Committee, who are a very pragmatic and a very principled committee. We actually work with what we have. And at the end of the day, we actually assist your journey through the end until the third reading when this becomes an act of Parliament. So kia ora to you, and I look forward to again welcome you here to Parliament for the third reading. Nō reira, e koutou rā, e mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Peter Parauni.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, tēnā hoki tātou i te hare. E tūwahi poto tēnei, i te tautoko ngā mihi i mihi ngia, koutou ngā kai kōrero i tuake mui au, ki wa tātou manuhiri mai i Rangitane o Manawatu. Nā reira koutou ngā kai kawe o tēnei kaupapa, tēnā koutou. Tēnā hoki koutou i ngā tini mate i Wainganui a koutou, kei te tūhonohono ki tēnō ngā mate ke Wainganui a mātou i roto te wharene. Engari i tēnei wā e tika ana ki mihi kauana ki tēnā o ngā kai kawe o tēnei kaupapa, kare rātou i Wainganui a tātou i te rāne. Aha koa mohena i a tātou kei kone rātou i roto te wairuatanga. Nā reira e tika ana ke mihi kauna ki a rātou. Nā reira ko ea tawahi mā rāta, ka hoki mai ki a tātou i te hunga ora, a tēnā koutou, kia ora mai no tātou. Mr. Speaker, I stand on behalf of New Zealand First to support this bill and to recognise that this bill, by way of the Crown acknowledging unfortunate episodes in our country's history, to try and rectify the situation by way of redress as is articulated in the bill. As the previous speaker alluded to, this bill was referred to the Māori Affairs Select Committee, and the committee recommended the bill pass with some amendments, which include some resulting from surveys of the redress sites. And these amendments would update the legal descriptions of a number of land provisions. Mr. Speaker, we received 9 submissions, and as previously alluded to, not all of the submitters supported the passing of the bill. And that was some of the issues that the committee had to consider before making its recommendation back to this House. And like all settlements, they don't please everyone. But the attempt has been made to try and offer redress for the actions of the Crown, and that have, in this case, left Rangitane o Manawatu almost landless. And this bill is intended to protect what land they have left and to ensure that the land that has been offered in this bill helps to secure the long-term future of this iwi. Mr. Speaker, the bill was first introduced in December last year, referred to the Maori Affairs Committee in March of this year, and we reported back to this House at the beginning of this month. And while the physical journey may be regarded as a long one, but in terms of the processes of this House, I think has been fairly quick compared to other settlement bills. And so I want to acknowledge this House for at least giving some urgency to this claim. Mr. Speaker, previous to this bill being presented in the House, some comments were made, and I just want to quote some of the words that were articulated in earlier readings of this bill. The people of Rangitane o Manawatu were subjected to legislative prejudice which made their land more susceptible to partition, fragmentation and alienation. This was enacted in the hope that Māori would abandon their tribal and communal structures of traditional land holdings. And goes further to say that by the end of 1880, Rangitane o Manawatu held about 20,000 acres of land. 50 years later, this iwi's land holdings had reduced to 2,903 acres. So you can see, Mr. Speaker, why this particular bill is very important to the long-term future, particularly the economic future of Rangitane o Manawatu. Mr. Speaker, when this bill is enacted, it will give effect to the deeds of settlement signed between Rangitane o Manawatu and the Crown, which they did in November last year, which again signals the rapid progress of this bill through the parliamentary process to today. And again, I think that is a reflection on the commitment made by those people who are responsible for this bill, and also for the work that the Maori Affairs Select Committee played in ensuring that this bill got to this stage. In just closing, Mr. Speaker, I heard the Minister make reference to the lady who has led this charge, Danielle Harris, and everyone's been talking about their whakapapa. Well, I just want to remind this House, and I might have to remind Danielle as well, that she has connections to the north, very strong connections to the north. And perhaps, Danielle, we may need to have you come home and help us with our particular settlement process. But be that as may, I just make reference to Danielle because I worked with her grandmother, her maternal grandmother, and I will never forget that lady, because she was one of my early mentors when I started with the Maori Affairs Department in Auckland. So ever since then, Danielle spent some time working in the Office of the Maori Trustee when I was working there, so I have a lot of regard for her. And can I say, Danielle, that I do feel sorry for you. Sorry in the fact that it doesn't matter how much you may have worked to get the settlement to this stage, there'll always be people within your iwi that will criticize you and not thank you for the work that you have done. Hei aha, wena te ahuatanga o tātou o te ao Māori. Nā reira, e te tuhine, koutou ngā kaitau toko I aia, koutou I hapa hia tēnei kapa, ki mau mai ki kone I roto te whare nei, ngā mihi o ki kia koutou. Nā reira, Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude by saying that I commend this bill to the House.
Kia ora. Mika Waitiri.
Te manga te whare tēnā koe, inga membo te whare nei tēnā tātou katoa. Auku rauranga tirama, I koe mā e koroma. E te iwi kua tai mai, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnā koutou I runga te kaupapa whakahirahira. He pānui tuarua o koutou pire. Te pire whakataunga I ngā kareme o Rangitāne o Manawatū. Nō reira, tēnā koutou nau mai, hoki mai. Mr. Speaker, it's indeed my privilege to take a call on the second reading of the Rangitāne o Manawatū Settlement Bill. And before I kick off and talk about the bill, Sir, can I stand here in all humility on behalf of the people that I represent in this House, the iwi I represent in this House, from Te Tairāwhiti, from Kahungunu, from Rangitāne, to Te Atiawa ki awa Nuiarangi, Te Awa Kairangi, to offer my disappointment that the people of Rangitāne or Manawatū have to wait to see their bill read a third time. And without no doing of yourselves, you have found yourself subject to yet another delay. And so I just want to go on record on behalf of the people I represent of Ikaro Rāwhiti in acknowledging your tolerance at no doing of your own. So ngā mihi ki a koutou. Sir, the process in checking and researching this bill, I just want to note that the terms of reference was signed way back in 27th of July 1998 with Sir Douglas Graham. The heads of agreement, which was a precursor to the agreement in principle, was signed on the 25th of November 1999. Then this claim went into a 10-year hiatus. And the deed of settlement was initialled here in this whare in the Mātangi Rea room on the 1st of May 2015. And with my colleague, our colleague, Adrian Rurewhia, the member of Te Taiho Uru, we joined with the whānau to celebrate that initial signing in Mātangi Rea room. Then the deed of settlement was finally signed on the 14th of November 2015, and of course the first reading we had on the 15th of March 2016. Sir, at the second reading, it's important that we reflect back into the House what transpired through the Select Committee process. And there are two particular comments I want to make in that regard. I'm not a member of the Māori Affairs Select Committee, but I do have a passion of treaty settlements and land retention in terms of the hands of Māori. But, Sir, I do want to acknowledge the work of the very hard-working Māori Affairs Select Committee, ably chaired by the Honourable Member Nuk Korako, and, of course, all the members on the House that have participated in dealing with this claim. Sir, like all claims, each and every one is unique. When I read this claim, particularly the historic account, and I want to just take the opportunity, Sir, to just reflect a couple of passages, because it, for me, summarised just some of the hurt and humiliation that the Rangitāne or Manawatū people suffered. And this is part 1, clause 8, subclause 3, and I quote, "In 1864, the Crown purchased approximately 250,000 acres in the Te Ahua Tūranga block from Rangitāne or Manawatū for £12,000. The Crown urged Rangitāne or Manawatū to sell as much land as possible and succeeded in reducing the size of the reserves to be made from the sale for Rangitāne or Manawatū from 5,000 acres to 2,570 acres. The reserves that were made did not include several areas of great cultural significance. after the Crown declined requests from Rangitane o Manawatu to change the reserves, the iwi repurchased several of their kāinga in the block. In 1867, the Crown gave 71 acres of the block to another iwi without consulting Rangitane o Manawatu. The land is now central Palmerston North and valuable commercial and residential real estate. So, Sir, here we have yet again a disposition of more land of the Haukainga and gifted to another iwi. And in all treaty settlements, there are pockets where this has occurred. And I just reference that because this is taking definitely land that belonged to Rangitane o Manawatu and giving it to another iwi. And all I can say is the iwi that has got this land has probably had an injustice done to them. So we have two wrongs that don't equal a right. But I wanted to raise that because it's in the historical count of this bill. So I just wanted to mention that, Sir. And then if I turn to the apology of the bill, this is, again, Part 10, Part 1, Clause 10, Subclause E. And it states this: the Crown deeply regrets its failure to appropriately acknowledge the mana and rangatiratanga of Rangitane o Manawatu. Through this apology and by this settlement, the Crown seeks to atone for its wrongs and begin the process of healing. The Crown looks forward to re-establishing its relationship with Rangitane o Manawatu based on mutual trust, cooperation and respect for the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles. And you might ask, Sir, why am I making reference to that particular clause in the bill? It is because over recent times in this House, I have seen legislation passed under urgency by majority that actually goes completely against that statement. Completely against that statement. The Public Works Act is an example. We're currently trying to deal with the Kumadex, which is a treaty settlement. And so when I read statements like this, it is incumbent on the Crown to uphold this when they're dealing with other pieces of legislation. Otherwise, it makes clauses like this untrue. That if we are going to re-establish mutual trust, cooperation and respect for the Treaty of Waitangi and principles, then that covers everything we do in this House. Not just for this particular iwi's treaty settlements, but for all New Zealanders. And I think you get my point on that, Sir. So I want to turn, like I said earlier, to the contributions and the hard-working work of the Māori Affairs Select Committee. And there are two submissions. I noticed there were 9 made, but I just want to reference two, Mr. Speaker, particularly. One was written or submitted by Ngāti Apa. And the reason why I want to raise this, Sir, is because many of our people do not see any value in the Select Committee process. And I wanted to reference these two particular submissions because of the way they were received, but also the way in which the committee considered them and in a considered way have reported back to the House. And so if we are, as Māori, going to have an impact or influence on how legislation is made, then the Select Committee process, I can't speak highly enough of it. So the two that I want to highlight, Sir, is the Ngāti Apa. And of course, this is about the Ngāti Apa hapu of Ngāti Tauira. And the issue here was that it is currently, the hapu of Ngāti Tauira is currently in the Ngāti Apa settlement. And essentially their submission was, we're in Ngāti Tauira is in Ngāti Apa, but they're also reflected in this bill here that we are talking about today. And what I do notice, and when I read the Māori Affairs response to that, and I think it was a very valid response, and that was around saying that there's no exclusive rights to a hapu. And so although it appears in this bill, it doesn't mean that everyone has to come under Rangitane or Manawatu, likewise with Ngāti Apa. And I thought that that was a well-considered response to obviously Ngāti Apa's concerns. The other one, Mr Speaker, was the one put in by Rangitane Settlement Negotiation Trust. And in their submission, they talked about the kind of shared area of interest with Rangitane or Manawatu. And, oh, my time's up. Oh, my gosh. That was being wonderful. I commend this bill to the House. Thank you very much, and aroha mai, kia ora tātou te whānau.
Pene Henare.
Tēnā koe te māngai o te whare ka noho tunua hau ki roto i te reo Māori mo te roa ngāke o taku kōrero i te rānei. Ka huri tuatu ki a koutou e ngā tini whanaunga. Koutou kua takahia nei i te ara whānui ki ngā pautama o te whare pāre mata e tū nei. Haere mai, haere mai, haere mai. Ka tāpai atu aku mihi ki ngā mihi kua tukuna e te māngai o te whare o tiranga mema o tēnei whare ki a koutou. Me te inoi atu kia tāpai o koutou tini aitua ki runga i te tāhuhu o tēnei whare. Ka tukuna ngā kai kōrero me ngā pātū o tēnei whare, te tangi atu, te mihi atu, te poroporo aki atu ki ngā hunga mate ki roto i a koutou, o tira ki roto i a mātou, kia kotahi ai te kōrero, haere mai haere e ngā mate. Kia whakahokia mai ngā rārangi kōrero ki a tātou i te whare tēnā koutou, e Rangitāne tēnā koutou katoa. Ka tū au e te māngai o te whare ki te kōrero ki tēnei pire Rangitāne o Manawatu Claims Settlement Bill. Ka kōrero a hau mo etahi o ngā wahanga me te hia kia tautoko i etahi o ngā kōrero kua kōrero mai e ngā memo o te whare i te rānei. Ka timata ake a hau ki ngā mihi ki te hea mana o te rōpū whiriwhiri i ngā take Māori, arā ko tū te haunuku kōrako. Ka mihi atu a hau ki aia me te rōpū whiriwhiri i ngā take. Nā rātau te mahi nui ki te āta whakarongo ki ngā mamai, ki ngā kōrero i puta mai i tēnei pire. Hei whiriwhiri, hei totohe, kātahi ka whakaritea mai i te pire ki roto i tana pānuitanga tuarua ki roto i te wharenei. Ka tāpai hoki aku mihi ki te minita, kua whakapau wera mō tēnei take, he mihi atu anau ki aia. E te māngai o te whare, ka whakaaro ake a hau, mō tēnei kreme, mō tēnei pire, i timata ai ki roto i ngā tau te kau, iwa te kau. E hia nei ngā minita mō ngā take tiriti kua mau i taua mana, ara te minita mō ngā take tiriti, mai i te taima i rehita tuatahi tēnei pire, tainua mai ki tēnei wā. I ruku hia atua hau ki roto i ngā puna mahara, ana ka kimi ake i ngā minita e rima. Kua mahi ngātahi me tēnei iwi, me tēnei karangatanga a Rangitāne ki Manawatu. Toko rima e te māngai o te whare, nō reira, kaua e pāpauri mai e Rangitāne. E harana koutou te he, ko ngā neke hanga o tēnei whare, ko reira tonu te he, e he nei, e takahi nei i a koutou me tō koutou tāinga mai te rānei. Kāti, e te māngai o te whare, ki roto i te roa ngāke o ngā pire i te rānei, ka kōreroa hau mō tēnei, ki au nei he nanakia ki roto i ngā pire. Mehe mea e hia ana te pire ki te whakataiapa i tetahi iwi, tetahi hapu rānei, e hoa, ka raruraru. Ka raruraru nā te mea, ka whakapapa te tini o ngā hapu, te tini o ngā iwi ki etahi wāhi. Koira a hau i roto i te pire e pāna ki oku whanaunga o Ngāti Kahu ki Whangaroa, ka raru mehe mea ka whakaritea ko kahu kura ariki te tupuna rongonui o Ngāti Kahu, nā ka kite atu tātou ki roto o Rangitāne. Etahi o ngā raruraru e pāna ki ngā whenua. Ko wai mā te mana whenua. Ko wai mā te hapu ka whai pānga ki enei wāhi. Nā ka whakaaro ake hau mo etahi o ngā wahanga kei roto i te pire, arā ko te ngahere o tangi moana. E hia nei ngā hapu, e hia nei ngā iwi ka whai pāanga ki taua ngahere. Engari, ko te whakaritea nei i tēnei pire me te ture a te kāwanatanga, a ka hore, ana, anei ko ngā kai whakahaere o te ngahere, ana ka poroa etahi, ko etahi o ngā hapu ka mahue ki muri, ko etahi o ngā hapu kua paia ki waho. Koina te raruraru mehe mea ka tukuna mā te ture Pākehā, ngā whakapapa me ngā whakaritenga ki roto i te ao Māori, mea, te whakamanu. Koina taku whakatau i tēnei wā e te māngai o te whare. Koina tetahi o ngā raruraru ki roto i tēnei pire. Haunga rā ko tērā, ka kite atua hau ki roto i tēnei pire. Ka āta totohe, ka āta whakarite ngā āpiha o te minita i ētahi huarahi. Ka āhei ngā hapu kua poroa, ka āhei ngā hapu kua peia te whaipānga ki roto i ngā whenua kua whakahoki atu ki a Rangitāne o Manawatu. Nō reira, he wero nui tēnā kei roto. Ka kapo hiakea hau i ngā kōrero o tōku tuahina me ka whaitiri. Me tana ki, ai marika, kua taka te kapa ki tēnei kāwanatanga, me kaua te pōhehe mā ngā iwi anahe te mana o te iwi Māori. Ka hore. Kua roa rawa mātou me ngā hapu putanua e ki atu ana, kaua e ware ki a mātou ngā hapu. Kei a mātou wa mātou ake mana. Nā ka whakaaro ake hau ki roto i a māua ko Pita Paraone, e kōrero ana mō Ngāti Hine ki roto i au o Ngāpuhi. Ana e pērāna, e pērāna. Nō reira ngā mihi nui ki te minita, kua whai whakaaro ki ngā hapu ki roto i ngā Pirene. Aha kua whakaritea ki raru i te maru o Rangitāne o Manawatu, nā, ko ona hapu katoa ka whakarārangi hia mai ki raro, nō reira ka mihi atua hau ki tērā whakaaro nui. E te māngai o te whare, ka pānuia hau i te whakapāha o te kāwanatanga ki a Rangitāne o Manawatu. I rongo atua hau i te aroha ki roto i taua whakapāha, i kite atua hau i te ngākau whakapono o te kāwanatanga ki roto i taua whakapāha. Engari, e te māngai o te whare, i au e pānui ana i te whakapāha, ka re anō au i kite i tētahi paku whakapāha, tētahi paku whakaaro mo te pōharatanga o Rangitāne o Manawatu. Ka kōrero, i ai ki te pire, ka kōrero mo te social structures. Ka kōrero mo te wrongdoing of the law. Engari, nā te mea, kua whānako hia i ngā whenua o Rangitāne o Manawatu, ko reira ka pōhara te iwi Māori. Ko reira ka pōhara ngā hapu me ngā iwi o Rangitāne. Engari, kāre anō au i kite i tētahi whakapāha, e pāna ki te waha ngā ohanga, e pāna ki te waha pūtea ki roto i tēnei pire. Poino, he whakaaro tēnei mā te minita a taihu ake nei e whakaaro hia. E te māngai o te whare, ka huri atu ki etahi o ngā wahanga, etahi atu wahanga o te pire, e mea atu ana, ka mahi ngātahi a Rangitāne o Manawatu, me te papa atawhai, me te tari whakahaere kōhuke, ana, ka waiho nātu taua kupu ki mua i a tātou, ko te kōhuke, arā ko te mineral tērā, ko te mineral tērā. Nō reira, ka mahi ngātahi a Rangitāne me ngā tari kāwanatanga, ki te whakarite i tō rātau ake whanaungatanga. Ka pēhea rātau e mahi ngātahi ana ki roto i ngā marama me ngā tau kei mua i te aroaro. Ka waiho nātu taua whakaritenga ki a Rangitāne o Manawatu me ngā tari kāwanatanga, he whakaaro pai tēnā. He whakaaro pai tēnā ki te whakahaere i ngā whenua, i ngā taonga ka whakahoki atu ki a Rangitāne o Manawatu. Ana, ka whai whakaaro ake hau mo te wāhi, mo te whenua o Awapuni, ka whakaaro ake hau mo te tihi o Mairehau. Aua whenua katoa ka āhei Rangitāne me ngā āpiha, me ngā tari kāwanatanga ki te hanga mahere ka pēhea a taiho ake nei. Kāti hei whakakapi ake ki roto i te miniti kotahi e toi ana. Ka mutu ake taku kōrero nā runga i i te wahanga tuatoru o te pire, ara part 3, te wehenga kotahi rau te kau, clause 110. E kōrero ana mō tēnei mea te right of first refusal. Aroha mai e te māngai o te whare, I'm not sure of a Māori word for right of first refusal, hoi no. Ka kōrero a right of first refusal i tēnei wā. Ka whakaaro ake ahau ki tērā ki roto i tēnei pire, anā kua kite atu i te whānui, i te whāroa o ngā kōrero e pāna ki tēnā wahanga. He mea pai tēnā, kia tiaki i te mana o Rangitāne o Manawatu, ka tiaki i konei e te māngai o te whare, ka waiho nātu ngā kōrero i tēnei wā, ka mihi atu kia Rangitāne o Manawatu, kua haere mai nei ki roto i te whare pāremata i te rānei, ko te manako, mā te atua koutou e tiaki, tō koutou haerenga huki ngā atu ki te kāinga kāti tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Kia ora. Joe Hayes.
Kia ora. E koro mai, kui mai, Rauranga Tirama. Tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai. E runga i te rā whakahirahira. Kia ora. I stand to take this final call in the Rangitāne o Manawatu iwi settlement bill, and I'm very proud to do this because my contribution is actually going to concentrate on some key figures that have actually worked behind the scenes to actually get this bill here to the House, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to pay tribute to the formidable Ruth Harris. And she was a formidable person, and she rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. But she was formidable in the fact that she drove this particular process for the iwi or Manawatu all the way to this point here today, Mr. Speaker. As I said, her staunch approach did get up the noses of people at times, but I can tell you during her time, it was her that took the head office of Tāne Nui Arangi from Main Street in Palmerston North and established it at Awapuni Hospital, Mr. Speaker. And she went and she needed some funding, and she went to seek it not from a Māori, Mr. Speaker, and not even from a Pākehā. She went to an Asian, Chinese investor who actually helped to establish the head office of Rangitāne o Manawatu at the Awapuni Hospital, Mr. Speaker. I also want to acknowledge the Fitzgerald whānau, Rangi Fitzgerald, his daughter Lorraine, who passed this year, who did a lot of work in behind the scenes, along with Ruth and the Harris whānau, Mr. Speaker. And finally, I would not like to acknowledge Tāne Nui Arangi Tauiawi, the Te Awiawi whānau, make up the third branch of that whānau, Rangitāne o Manawatu, Mr. Speaker. They make up a big portion of how this bill came here to the House, Mr. Speaker. And along the way, there were also the Rangatira Tarangi Baker and Auntie Ka Tate and her son Putaka Tate that was mentioned in the House today, Mr. Speaker. And I remember meeting Auntie Ka for the very first time. And I thought, ooh, she's a bit grumpy, but she actually held her place in everything that she did, Mr. Speaker. And I take my hat off to those women and those men, our tupuna, who worked diligently to this day, Mr. Speaker. And it is a shame that we can't finish the whole thing off over the next few days, but, you know, that's how it is, and today is the celebration for Rangitāne o Manawatu. Today we also see the tamariki and mukapuna of those very people that I have mentioned, Mr. Speaker, who have picked up the baton, picked up where their tupuna have left off, and they have carried and continue to carry the mantle from their forebears as the PSG group, the governance group. The daughter of Ruth Harris, another formidable Harris, Danielle. And no, Pita, you can't have Danielle up in North. She's staying with us. She is ours and always has been ours, Pita. Also, I want to also mention Chris Waiapu. Now, Chris is the son of Lorraine Fitzgerald and the mokapuna of Rangi Fitzgerald. And he is also on the PSG group, along with Hohepa Sharland, Tina Kawana and Terry Hapi. And whilst everybody looks at that group and thinks, you know, this is an amazing group together, they carry a load of responsibility for Rangitāne o Manawatu into the future. We've heard about the commercial redress of the Tangi Moana forest, Mr Speaker. But also, just recently, we heard and read in the newspapers about the farms that are coming up for sale through Landcorp. 6 in the South Island and 3 in the North Island. 2 of those farms are actually in Rangipane o Manawatu and Rangipane Tumai, Mr Speaker. And in the newspapers there was a discussion around that, around the iwi, the settled iwi will have RFR over when those farms come up for sale. And so, in closing, Mr Speaker, I just want to say that Tangi Moana Forest is one. The other one is the future of Tangi Moana Station, the Landcorp station. And that, Mr Speaker, is going to be the heavy weights of that PSG group on the way forward of the economic development future of Manawatu, or of Rangipane or Manawatu. And I stand proud to commend it to the House in the second reading. Kia ora.
Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye, and the contrary no. The ayes have it.
Rangatane o Manawatu Claim Settlement Bill, second reading.
The bill is set down for third reading next sitting day. Te waiata. Call on Government Order of the Day numbers 2 and 3.
Taranaki Iwi Claim Settlement Bill Committee Stage. Te Atiawa Claim Settlement Bill, committee stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Taranaki Iwi Claim Settlement Bill and the Te Atiawa Claims Settlement Bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chair.
Taranaki first. Members, the House and Committee on the Taranaki Iwi Claims Settlement Bill and the Te Atiawa Claims Settlement Bill. Point of order, Jamie Lee Ross.
Mr. Chair, I seek leave for the Taranaki Iwi Claims Settlement Bill to be debated as one question, and separately afterwards the Te Atiawa Claims Settlement Bill to also be debated as one question.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Then the question is that parts 1 to 4, schedules 1 to 3 and clauses 1 and 2 stand part. The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
Just very briefly, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my second reading speech, the Māori Affairs Committee reported the Taranaki Iwi Claims Settlement Bill back to the House on 2 September and recommended it be passed with a couple of technical amendments. SOP number 215 is in my name, and it provides 2 technical amendments to ensure that particular third-party interests are protected through the bill. The SOP amends the Taranaki Claims Settlement Bill by inserting a new clause 53.3, recording an easement in favour of the South Taranaki District Council, and a corresponding amendment to Schedule 2. So that's the only real issue that arises. There's been a little bit of a debate today about Part 2, Subpart 5, dealing with regional council representation. This is not imposed on the council. It's been drawn up as a result of discussions with the council, and they're very happy with what has transpired. It is exactly the same as the proposal set out, and I'll come to it when we deal with it, Part 2, Subpart 6 of the Te Atiawa Bill, where there was no objection, and it's also in similar form in the Ngāruahine Claims Settlement Bill. So we have selective concern about race-based policy, and I foreshadow that there could be a bit of excitement. There's been no opposition to the Rangatani o Manawatu Claims Settlement Bill, Subpart 3 of Part 2, of course provided for the establishment of the Manawatu River Catchment Advisory Board, a body set up involving Rangatani o Manawatu and also Rangatane in the Wairarapa to advise the Manawatu Wanganui Regional Council in relation to freshwater issues. So we do have selective concern, but the fact of the matter is that this body is as a result of discussions between the various iwi, the Crown, and the Taranaki Regional Council. There was some comment made about a referendum that was held in New Plymouth City last year. That dealt with a completely separate issue, which was the establishment of a Māori ward for the New Plymouth District Council. A completely different issue, and attempts to conflate them with respect, well, actually with no respect, totally misleading.
Members, we move to the vote, and we have the Minister's amendments as set out on SOP number 215. The question is that the amendments be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have... No. The noes have it. Are you asking for a party vote? Yes. Well, if you want a party vote, you must ask for one. All right, I'll ask the clerk to conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
32 votes in favour.
Green Party.
12 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
12 opposed.
Maori Party.
Votes in favour.
ACT New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Any other votes?
Members, the ayes are 67. The
Apologies.
Ah,
107. My handwriting, Mr. Chairman.
yes, the ayes are 107. Were you a doctor? Yeah. The ayes are 107. The noes are 12. The amendments are agreed to. So, members, we now moved. The question is at parts 1 to 4, schedules 1 to 3, and clauses 1 and 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill with amendment presently. Members, we now move to the Te Atawa Claims Settlement Bill, and leave has been sought for this to be taken as one question. So the question is at parts 1 to 4, schedules 1 to 4, and clauses 1 and 2 stand part. The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
Mr Chair, the Maori Affairs Committee has recommended that the Te Atiawa Claims Settlement Bill be passed with a couple of technical amendments. I've proposed a technical supplementary order paper, SOP 224, and this is going to make 2 technical amendments to clause 63 to ensure that certain property to be exchanged as part of the vesting of the taumata property, which is a cultural redress property, are able to be vested as intended by the deed of settlement. The changes ensure that the land exchanged for the taumata property will, in specific circumstances, be treated as cultural redress property, and that means, for example, that certain provisions of the Reserves Act won't apply when the reservation as a historic reserve is revoked, and requirements under the Resource Management Act in relation to the subdivision will not be required. So I commend the bill to the House with the minor technical amendments proposed by SOP 224, and again invite honourable members to read Part 2, Subpart 6, dealing with Taranaki Regional Council representation, and if it's not word for word exactly the same as in the Taranaki bill, it's quite frankly pretty close.
Ko Putaparoni, Tanakwe.
Mr Speaker, I realise that I was a bit slow in standing to take the opportunity of talking in the committee stages of the last bill, but I'll certainly take the opportunity of making reference to the issue of representation. And I know that already there is some discussion as to why we haven't opposed all the other Taranaki bills. And I just wanted to explain to the House that the Taranaki iwi settlement bill, in its clauses referring to the membership of council, is very specific. It articulates the name of the various tribes, and they are to be referred to as Taranaki iwi. That's number one. Number two, in opposing this that section and supporting that reference here in Te Atiawa Bill, we were led to believe that it was a duplication of the Local Government Act, and then on discovery we found that in the Local Government Act, reference is made to may, the word may, whereas in the Taranaki iwi bill, and I'm again connecting that bill to this bill, sir, the words that are used is must. So there is, in our mind, a big difference. And so I just want to make that point, irrespective of what the view of some voice on that other side might have. Thank you.
The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
Out of my respect and affection for the Honourable Member, I'll respond, because, and I do say this with the greatest of respect and affection, what he said is wrong, both in relation to the definition of the iwi of Taranaki. I refer him to clause 97 of the Taranaki Claims Settlement Bill. I refer him to clause 75 of the Te Atiawa Claims Settlement Bill. Looks pretty much the same to me. And then I refer the honourable member to iwi representation on the committee as provided by clause 77. The iwi of Taranaki may nominate 3 people each for these positions. The committee must appoint the members nominated to the appropriate committee. And then one goes across to clause 99 in the Taranaki bill, exactly the same. And if he goes to Ngā Ruahine Claim Settlement Bill, exactly the same. So, look, I'm not going to belabour the point because we've had a good old stoush about this in the course of the second reading speeches, and I certainly don't blame him because he is an honourable member and a very hard-working member of the committee, and I value his advice on a number of matters, particularly that iwi to the north, and so I'm not going to say what I would otherwise say were another person in the House.
So, Putaparioni.
Yeah, well, in that, if that is the case, Minister, then the position of New Zealand First would need to oppose that supplementary order paper.
Well, we haven't come to the vote yet.
No.
So, all right. Well, we are coming to the vote now. So we have the Minister's amendment. Order. We're going to have a vote. We're having the Minister's amendments as set out on SOP number 224. And the question is that the amendment be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party votes called for. Ask the clerk to conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
32 votes in favour.
Green Party.
12 in favour.
New Zealand First.
Opposed.
Maori Party.
2 votes in favour.
ACT New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Members, the ayes are 107, the noes are 12. The Minister's amendment is agreed to. We now come to the vote, and the question is that parts 1 to 4, schedules 1 to 4 and clauses 1 and 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party votes called for. Ask the clerk for a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
32 votes in favour.
Green Party.
12 in favour.
New Zealand First.
12 opposed.
Maori Party.
2 votes in favour.
ACT New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Members, the ayes are 107 and the noes are 12. Parts 1 to 4 and the schedules clauses amended will stand part. I will report this bill with amendment presently. Is Chester already? Here he comes. Otherwise, the House is resumed. Mr Speaker, the committee has considered the Taranaki iwi Claims Settlement Bill and reports it with amendment. The committee has also considered the Te Atiawa Claims Settlement Bill and reports it with amendment. Mr Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
Members, the question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. A party vote is called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
32 votes in favour.
Green Party.
12 in favour.
New Zealand First.
12 opposed.
Māori Party?
2 in favour.
ACT New Zealand?
1 in favour.
United
1
Future?
in favour.
Any other votes?
Members, the ayes are 107 and the noes are 12. The motion is agreed to. The Taranaki Iwi Claim Settlement Bill and the Te Atiawa Claim Settlement Bill are set down for third reading next sitting day. I call on Government Order of the Day number 4.
Rangatane tu mai rā, Wairarapa Tamaki Nui Arua Claim Settlement Bill, first reading.
Speaker.
The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Rangatani Tumaira Wairarapa Tamaki Nui Arua Claim Settlement Bill be now read a first time, and I nominate the Maori Affairs Committee to consider the bill. Mr. Speaker, only a month ago, I was welcomed onto Makirikiri Marae in Dunivik to sign the deed of settlement with Rangatane o Wairarapa and Rangitane o Tamaki Nui Arua. And I'm so very pleased to extend a warm welcome to the members of Rangatane who've travelled to be here in Parliament for the first reading of the bill. Delighted you're here, and I'm delighted that they were able to listen to the second reading of the Rangitane o Manawatu bill, and I'm sure there are some representatives there. And next week I shall be reporting to Rangitane in Blenheim, in the Wairau, that their relations are well on the way, and frankly that some of them should have been here today as well. So thank you very much for coming. It's great to see you there, especially only 1 month after that wonderful signing at Makirikiri Marae. At this time, my thoughts go to those members of Rangitane who've suffered the grievances addressed through this bill, those who began this journey, and yet are no longer here to experience this point in the history of their great iwi. They are in our thoughts today. I also acknowledge those who are with us, some of whom are sitting in the gallery today, particularly Manahi Paiwai and Jim Brimini and Mavis Mullins, people who, but the earlier two, although Mavis is everywhere, started this process so many years ago and provided support and guidance to the iwi negotiators as the settlement has progressed. Rangitane have been served over the years by very devoted negotiators and advisors, and I acknowledge the huge amount of work over many years by the negotiating team. It's always dangerous and indeed inappropriate probably to name individuals, but I do want to acknowledge Tipene Crisp in the gallery. Most of the time he's on my side because he works for the Office of Treaty Settlements, but the call of the whānau was too great and he's been on the other side for this negotiation, as one would expect. Can I acknowledge the Chief Crown Negotiator, Rick Barker, for the tremendous work that he has done on the settlement. I'm sure he would like to be here today, but I have a feeling he's up in Hauraki. I also acknowledge the various Crown agencies and the regional and district councils for their work, and that's not pro forma thanks, because, for example, the Tararua District Council have been very, very helpful as we've dealt with a couple of issues on the way through, and I acknowledge them and their retiring mayor. Mr. Speaker, the journey to settlement for Rangitane stretches back many years. Claims on behalf of the iwi were lodged in the 1980s. Tribunal hearings were held in 2004 and 2005, and the Great Wairarapa ki Tararua report was released in June 2010. In October 2011, the Crown recognised the mandate of the Rangitane Settlement Negotiations Trust to negotiate the settlement of the treaty claims. Negotiations commenced following the signing of terms of negotiation in 2012. On 28 March 2014, I signed an agreement in principle which set out the settlement package, And as I said last month, I signed the deed of settlement after it had been ratified by members of Rangitane, and the warmth and the energy of the Rangitane tamariki radiated on what was otherwise a very cold Dannevirke day. The Rangitane Tūmairā Claims Settlement Bill is being considered today, and it's going to give legislative effect to the redress that Rangitane will receive. And I want to take a moment to reflect on the history that sits behind the settlement legislation. Rangitane, and this came through so strongly at the signing ceremony, and I'd love some people who say, oh, the iwi are only interested in the money, to have been at Mākirikiri Marae, because they would have seen that the history and the cultural redress were at the heart of what iwi members were seeking. It was really a beautiful ceremony. But Rangitane welcomed Pākehā settlers to their rohe from the mid-1840s. Rangitane enjoyed considerable benefits from leasing land to these settlers and trading with them. The Crown then applied pressure on Wairarapa Māori to end the leases and sell their land to the Crown. By the mid-1850s, the Crown had acquired about 3/5 of the traditional rohe of Rangitane. When purchasing land, the Crown led this iwi to expect substantial educational, health and economic benefits. In the course of time, however, Rangitane did not experience many of these benefits, nor the prosperity that they could reasonably have expected to receive from settlement in their region. Neither did they receive the reserves the Crown had promised to set aside for iwi. In the 1860s, through the Native Land Court legislation, the Crown introduced a new land tenure system which was simply inconsistent with Rangitane traditional customs. In 1871, the Crown acquired considerable areas of Rangitane land in Te Tapiri Nui o Whātonga, including 60,000 acres of the Mangatoka block, despite the express opposition of Rangitane leaders. Their communities resisted land sales. They attempted to maintain tribal structures through a number of initiatives, including the various parliaments and the long-standing fight of Nereaha Tamaki, who took his case to the Privy Council. In a landmark decision, the Privy Council reversed the decision of the Court of Appeal and acknowledged that a system of customary Māori land tenure did exist and deserved recognition in court decisions. It's one of those interesting items of history that when the Supreme Court bill was going through in the early 2000s, everyone said that we needed a Supreme Court which would be more sensitive to resolution of Treaty of Waitangi claims, but the Privy Council actually understood this stuff very well indeed, and the Crown lost more often than it won when dealing with these issues. In fact, so much so that at one stage, one Saturday morning in the early 1900s, there was a gathering of all the judges and the lawyers in Wellington, and they had what was called a protest of the bench and bar, grumbling about a Privy Council decision which had been favourable to Māori. But, Mr Speaker, I digress, so back to the bill. The government's response to the Privy Council decision was to limit Māori rights to investigate the government's land purchases through the courts. In 1896, Rangitane leaders were involved in gifting ownership of the Wairarapa Lakes to the Crown. Instead of providing ample reserves in the vicinity of the lakes as agreed, the Crown provided reserves several hundred kilometres away in the King Country. Unbelievable today, but that's what happened. By the early 20th century, the same sad story, Rangitane virtually landless, and their communities struggled to maintain their customary homes, their knowledge and language, and then came urbanisation in the 20th century. So it's a grim background, and it's one that I invite everyone in the rohe of Rangitane to read and understand, because they will understand exactly why we're doing what we're doing today. Last month at Mākirikiri Marae, I presented the Crown apology to Rangitane, who graciously accepted it, and it was said that it would go a long way to helping Rangitane people understand who they are. So there's a big settlement package here, and I'm almost out of time. And what I want now is to commend the bill to the House, and if it passes, it will go to the Maori Affairs Committee, and I know that they're going to do a very good job and get the bill back to the House very, very quickly. I say this all the time, but it's heartfelt every time I say it. It's not possible to compensate Rangitane fully for the loss and prejudice suffered. I acknowledge the generosity in accepting the apology, and I believe the settlement outlined in this bill is going to help Rangitane realise their further endeavours and their aspirations. Mr. Speaker, I consider the bill should proceed without delay to the Maori Affairs Committee. I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Mika Whaitiri.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Greetings to fellow members of the House. E te iwi o Rangitane ki Wairarapa Tamaki Nui Arua, tēnā tātou katoa. Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise that I had to abruptly end my last speech. And that's what you get when you sit in the House for, 6 hours before you get a call on these treaty bills. So I do apologise, and I do want to acknowledge Daniel and all the negotiators of Rangitane o Manawatu for a fabulous job. Sir, it is the first reading of the Rangitane Tūmaira Wairarapa Tamaki Nui Arua Bill, and no doubt support it entirely, that we help facilitate it off to the Māori Affairs Select Committee so we can have the bill back, so we get into the second reading and then third reading, so we can ensure that the people, the iwi here, can get on with their affairs. But sir, can I just please acknowledge all those that have come down here that are in the gallery. You've made mention, the Honourable Minister for Treaty Negotiators of Manahi Pāwai. I see Jim Rimene, and of course Mavis and Koro Mullins, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, te whānau kua tai mai. Sir, Rangitane traced their descent from the explorers of Kupe and Whātonga, rangatira of the mighty waka of Kurahopo, and the grandfather of the eponymous ancestor Rangitane. The traditions record that for centuries the Rangitane people settled in Wairarapa and Tamaki Nui Arua before 1840, and they have a special association with many places, including the Wairarapa Lakes, Eastern Coast, and Te Tāpiri Nui o Whātonga, known by others as 70 Mile Bush. Sir, this bill acknowledges the grievances of the Rangitane people, including the Crown's acquisition of vast areas of land and its failure to properly survey or protect from alienation a number of reserves, the Crown's failure to protect Rangitane from virtual landlessness and from the disintegration of their tribal structures, the social deprivation that resulted, and of course the loss of Te Reo Māori. Sir, I want to take the time, hopefully stay within my 10 minutes, to acknowledge that this bill has 3 parts, and the Minister has outlined, of course, the important critical part is the historic account and the apology, which forms part 1. And of course we go into the cultural address, and the Minister touched on the protocols, the statutory acknowledgements and the deed of recognition, the Manawatu River Catchment Advisory Board, some classification, changes of geographical names, some vesting of cultural redress properties, and of course vesting and gifting back of properties. Part 3, we talk about commercial redress, and I want to acknowledge the transfer of commercial redress properties and deferred selection properties, some licensed land, access to protected sites, and of course a topic of debate that has been swirling around this House for this week and weeks to come is the right of first refusal over right of first refusal land. And just to say to members of this House, the right of first refusal and land taken under the Public Works Act for many iwi that haven't settled, or in the case of this particular iwi who are in the process of getting legislation through, those mechanisms of reclaiming land is so critical. It is so critical because we have lost so much. We have lost so much. And the ability to ensure that land that was taken under the Public Works Act is no longer needed for the reason in which it's taken, then it must be offered back, uninhibited, back to the original owners. And yet, in recent times in this House, we've passed legislation that nullifies land taken for housing purposes. We've made that call in this House. And I just wanted to go on record that this side of the House put up an SOP to protect iwi's interest for future settlements. I must acknowledge the bill, the act that we passed under urgency, so it didn't even go to Select Committee, acknowledges existing treaty settlements, but for all the rest of us that haven't got to the starting block, you've missed out through this act in Parliament. And so it is very dear to me that every inch of land that is geared towards treaty settlement, us as parliamentarians must think twice before we move legislation that removes that ability for iwi to get back land that is so critical to them. And so I want to just to acknowledge that. And so in reference to the in part 3 of the right of first refusal, we do hope that when we scrutinise it in the Māori Affairs Select Committee, I understand they've been briefed by officials on what actually right of first refusal means, and so maybe that will come up in their deliberations. But, Sir, yes, I will be on time. I want to acknowledge the hard work of all the negotiators. As a former treaty negotiator myself on my father's iwi o Rongo Whakaata, the sacrifice that you put into treaty claims are unmeasurable. The sacrifice you have to make in terms of where you are yourself, on your family, and you never ever please everybody in the iwi. You never ever please everybody in the iwi, but you're driven to get the absolute best deal, and I have no doubt your negotiators have achieved that. They've achieved that on behalf of your iwi members, the best possible deal with the resources and the timing that you have available. So I want to acknowledge you all for the hard work, the perseverance, the compromises, the ear-ringing, the backstabbing that would have happened to us all. I just want to acknowledge that, and I want to thank you on behalf of Rangitane. I also want to acknowledge the officials that support the Honourable Minister for Treaty Settlements, Chris Finlayson. I know his heart is in the right place when he moves to settle treaty settlements, and so I want to acknowledge and thank the Minister and all those officials that support him. And sometimes we disagree, but I definitely know that the Honourable Minister is committed to ensuring that we have not just expedient and quick settlements, but they are fair. But having said that, Sir, we also have a responsibility in this House that when we are passing legislation that cut across not just existing treaty settlements, but potentially future treaty settlements, that we need to pause. We need to pause, and that is where I believe our honouring the treaty, actually, the rubber hits the road. That when we are considering legislation that's going to alienate Māori from whenua, then we need to be very, very careful, because our people have lost too much already. And I don't want to be part of a parliament that just, we've done that treaty settlement, let's carry on. Everything we do in this House interrelates. And as I reflect on Rangitane's own historical count, they gave land, they sold land in the hope that they will get the benefits in return. And the benefits around health, education and their reo maintain was never ever met by the Crown. And so that's why I make this point, Sir, that incumbent on everybody in this House, when passing legislation that's going to impact on iwi rights going forward, then all I say is be very considered, kick it back to the Select Committee process and allow iwi to have their say. Kia ora tātou.
I call Marama Fox. Great.
Tēnā koe te mana whakawā, nei te mihi atu ki a koe o tira ki te whare. Heoi anō kia koutou mā e tai ati nana mai. Tai ati nana mai. Te wātuatahi haramai au ki tēnei whare ki te whakarongo ki ngā kōrero o te tiriti e whakawhiti ana. Man, tangi hotu hotu ahau. Tangi hotu hotu te manawa. Noho ana te whakarongo ki te tāhai whenua, ki te mate tangata, ki ngā tau, kua whakapau wera wera, whakapau kaha ki te tūtuki, ngā wawata, ngā hiahia. E noho au te tangi hotu hotu. E hara nōku te whānau, engari te whakarongo ki tēnā kōrero, ki roto i tēnei whare, ki roto i te kāwana nei, hika. Engari anō mō tēnei rangi ka tiro atu au ki a koutou. Pā mai ki runga i te manawa te pauri, te harikoa, ka kite a kanohi a koutou ka hoki ngā māhara, kia rātou mākua wehe atu. Ka re tonu i konei te kite i te hua o rātou nā mahi. Ka tangi. Nā reira, kai te hiahia au te kōrero, hoi anō rā, mehe me ka tangi hika. Kua pau kato taku korokoro, whango haere te reo o tēnei nā i te whawhai ki aku hoa. Kia o tāua whanau ngā Ron. Oh, Mr. Mark. Engari, kei konei matau, kei konei tatau, ki te tūtuki i ngā kōrero, tēnei pānuitanga tuatahi. Ārangi tāne, tini whetu ki te rangi, rangi tāne ki te whenua. Ka tuku aku whukaro, ki onku Cookie tēnei wā. Nā, kare onku Jimmy reira neha. Kei te kāinga. Tōna kaha māwiwi. Ka tuku whukaro ki taku whaia. Tōna hoa wahine. Ngā rangatira katoa kua mate atu. Ka hoki aku māhara ki a rātou. Aku māhara ki a rātou. Ai, tēnā koutou, oku pau, oku rahi. I tipu ake au i o tautahi. Engari hoki, i au e hoki atu ki te kāinga, i te Wairarapa. 1988, I think. I tīmata e nei kōrero. Kai te pirangi mātou te haere ki te tarai pūnara. You know, te koutou, rua te koutou, pupu ake te whawhai, no ngā tika hungunu mātou. Kai te he, no rangi tāne. Ti tiro ki te whakapapa. Ana, ko rangana au ki ngā kōrero katoa ko whakawhiti nei. I roti te kāinga, haere tonu nei, nei rangi, kare kore. Engari, ko tai ki tēnei wā. Kei konei au te ki atu, kai te tautoko au i a koutou. Kai te tautoko au i te whawhai. Kia tū rangatira te iwi o Rangitāne, i runga i te whenua, i runga i te mato o te whenua o Wairarapa, o ngō tāmaki nui ārua. I reira koutou. Ka re taia te wāwāhi te taura whakapapa. Engari anō mo te taura harakeke. Engari ko te taura whakapapa, ka hono tātou ki a tātou ki te whenua Rangitāne. Nā reira tēnā koutou. As the multitude of stars are in the sky, so are the people of Rangitāne on the land. And Mr. Speaker, I support this bill coming to the House, and long the journey has been to bring it here. Many have passed, but many remain, and the struggle continues. This claim concerns Rangitāne taonga, whenua, yes, but in particular, identity, language, and culture. So I could talk a lot about the place of the land from Ōwhanga to Akitio, Mangatainoka, famous for tui, Whakataki, Rangi Whakaoma, Whareama, Motuwairaka, Tununu, Ngāwi, taino atu ki te ngutu awa o awa kairangi. koe rā te whenua, mai te manawa tū, te katoa taua rohe, engari mo te tīkanga, mō ngā kōrero whakapapa, mō ngā hononga ki taua whenua kātangi. Kei te ore ore, te pau, e ki nei, ko tō tātou tūpuna tēnā o Ngāti Kahungunu. Maumahara au ki te wā, kai tērā taho o te pai, tērā taho o te āte, te pai e noho ana, me ngā whawhai nui kua puta mai. Engari, ko kite anō au i te maia, i te kaha o te nākau nui, ki te whakapapa, kia mōhio, ko wai au e tuake nei, ko wai au e tuake nei ki runga i tēnei rohe o Wairarapa o Tāmaki Nui Ārua. Ia koutou haere ki te kura ko tahi kē te karanga no Ngāti Kahungunu, koena. Engari, i te raputanga o te hononga whakapapa, hika mā, ko wai tēnei, Ngāti Hāmua. Ko wai tēnei, Niriaha. Ko wai ēnei tūpuna o tātou. Ha te take kare matau i te mōhio. I runga i te narohanga o te reo Māori. I runga i te tūtuki o te ōhaki o Pauropo Tangaroa, kare mātau e paku mōhio, ko wai mātau. Hiaha ai ko ngaro kē te reo. I waiho mā iwi ke atu hei whāngai. Rawe, rawe. Rawe ki a rātau, te haramai ki te awhina, ngā puhi, kā mihi. Ngā tiporau, kā mihi. Tūhoi, kā mihi, kā tika. Engari kāre anō rātau e mōhio ki te kato o tātou, me o tātou mate, o tātou nawe, o tātou kōrero, hōhonu, tūpuna. Nā reira i ngaro, te hononga whakapapa, te kōrero, e hono ai tātou. Kare taia te pēhea, kai tētahi waka, tētahi waiwai, kai tērā waka, tētahi waiwai. Tātou, tātou e. Tika. Ai te mohe o koutou, ko wai tēnei nā e tuake kei mui a koutou. Ko taku karanga ki ngā uri whakaheke, ki ngā tamariki mokapuna o te kāinga, me rapua te huarahi hei haere ngātahi tātou katoa. Ma tātou tēnā, ma tātou. Rangitāne mā, kahungunu mā, koe nei ngā taha e rua, kāri au i te whakahe tētahi, rungi tētahi, ingari me hāpai, me maumahara te kōrero. Hei paku whakaro ki te whenua, ki tāte reo tauiwi pē e ki nei. In 1 minute, 20 seconds. Wairarapa lands and Tāmaki Nui Ārua lands 2,421,543 acres. In the 1840s to 50s, they started to acquire land, but in 1 year, from June 1853 to January 1854, 1.2 million acres gone. In the next 10 years, another 400,000 acres. By the turn of the century, another 500,000 acres. 84% of the whenua no longer in the hands of our people, less than 1% today. It goes right to the heart of the issue. When you are landless, how do you support your whānau? Driven into the pits of poverty, how do we aspire to overcome all of the issues that keep us oppressed? Today is a monumental day to turn the tide. And Mr. Speaker, kia koutou o ku whanaunga, ka tuku tēnei pire ki te whare tautoko marika matau o te Pāti Māori. Tēnā koutou katoa.
I call Materia Ture.
Tēnā koutou i te whare, i te tūtahi, ka mihi au ki te rangitane. Tu mai rā, tēnā koutou katoa. The Green Party supports this bill and we're looking forward to it going through all its stages quickly and progressing quickly. There's been a lot of talk already from members about the redress and the history. One of the things I'm really pleased to see in the bill, just to take a slightly different tack, is the redress, is the provision for the rangitane to have positions on the management of the Manawatu River. I saw, which I think, I know, it's the Green Party, we're talking about this. I'm like, yes, please, more Māoris in the management of our rivers, please. That's a great first step in the protection of our awa. And so, you know, I'm a river kid. This is how we grew up. My dad, when we were living in Ashurst, my dad would come home from work and he had this really great Kingswood station wagon, and he would pick us up and pick up the soap, and we would be able to ride down to either the Pohangana River on one side or the Manawatu River on the other of Ashurst, sitting on the back of the Kingswood doors. You know how we used to be able to, you put the door of the station wagon down and you could sit on the back of it and you let your little legs dangle over the side. Yeah, he would drive slowly down the hill, down to Pohangana or around to Ashurst Domain to the Manawatu, and we would swim and wash and just have this fabulous time. I spent summer after summer after summer in those rivers. And so we know that those rivers have been, at times have been devastated. Manawatu was one of the most polluted rivers in our country for a period there as a result of runoff from farms and from town, from this constant sources of pollution. But it was also, like, that's where Dad took us Elim. You know, we were down there all the time getting food as well as swimming and having a wash. These were the ways that we lived our lives. We weren't posh Māori whānau, we were just ordinary working class Māori living on the land that we belonged to, swimming in the waters that we belonged to, taking sustenance from both when we needed to. That was just how you did stuff. And so, but we had no control over what was going on. And now, at least one step towards that in this bill is rangitane having a much more involvement in the protection of those awa, the awa that give us life, the awa that are such a joy for ourselves in the past and for our kids and grandkids well into the future. So, I mean, it's a small part of the bill, and there's a lot of description in the bill about the cost to rangitane of the confiscations, of the sales, of the failure to deal with the reserves effectively, all of those things. But there are good things as well that will prove enormously beneficial for rangitane themselves and for the wider community and for the environment. So I just wanted to highlight that. There's some great things that are going on with this too. And finally, so I just want to acknowledge Hinari Kani, who was involved in the negotiations. Absolutely lovely man with a big, big heart who just puts a huge amount of work into this and also into environmental protection. It's a real passion for him, taking care of our kids, taking care of our environment, whānau and whenua. That's what it's all about. So finally, Sue, just want to say congratulations to those who have negotiated to this point. There's a little bit more work to go, but it's the last end of the process. And I'm looking forward to our participation on the Māori Affairs Select Committee as we see this bill through. Kia ora koutou katoa.
I call Joanne Hayes.
Tēnā koe te mana whakawa. Ka nuiti mihi atu ki a koutou o ke whānau no Wararapa rawa ko Tamaki Nui Arua. Kia ora. I want to carry on with the theme that I had started with my previous speech for rangitane o Manawatu, and I want to acknowledge some key people who, as I said, without their mahi, without their kaha, we wouldn't be here today. I want to acknowledge Uncle Jim Rimini and Manahi Paiwai. They were the ones that lodged the claim for both iwi. And it was their work and behind the scenes that has got us here today. I want to acknowledge Uncle Dabi Pau and his wife Tākoto from Te Hika Papaumu, and he supported the process right through to his passing, Mr. Speaker. I want to acknowledge, and I can see the photos of our tupuna up there in the gallery, Mr Speaker. I want to acknowledge my Uncle Cookie Rimini. Uncle Cookie was a paramount chief for us in Wairarapa, Mr Speaker, and his wife, Auntie Hoagie, or everyone knew her as Auntie Hoagie. Some people knew her as Auntie Helen, and some people, my mother, knew her as Auntie Grumpy. But anyway, she was lovely, my auntie, and together she supported Uncle Cookie all the way for all his mahi and behind this bill, Mr Speaker. I want to tend to the living. I want to acknowledge again, another formidable rangitane wahine toa, Mavis Mullins, who has done some amazing work, not just for rangitane, but Ātihaunui Paparangi as well, has also benefited from her expertise within the governance area and her expertise here as an iwi negotiator, along with Richard Jones and our Jason Kerehi and Tepene Chris from Wairarapa. The four of you have done an amazing job working with or sometimes against our Crown negotiator, Rick Barker, but anyway, for all the ups and downs, we've managed to get here today, Mr Speaker, and Rick's also done an amazing job. I want to acknowledge Mike Kawana. Mike has been, like our kaumātua for Wairarapa, he has stepped up into the breach when our kaumātua have passed away, and he is like the person that we look to when we go back to Masterton, Mr Speaker, who was there to keep our marae and our pai warm, Mr Speaker. And also to Maria Rimini, who continues to keep the wheels turning for Wairarapa and Masterton. On the Tamaki Nui Arua side, Mr Speaker, I want to acknowledge the CEO of Tamaki Nui Arua, which is Oriana Paiwai. Oriana and I go back many years, from our university days right through to our future. Last night I hosted her and another friend of ours up in Bellamy's for dinner. We celebrated our birthdays. Our birthdays are only a few days apart, and so we celebrated that there last night. But I want to acknowledge Oriana, because it's been Oriana that's been keeping me up to speed with what's been going on with the negotiation process for the Rangitane Tūmaira settlement bill, Mr Speaker. Finally, and most important, Mr Speaker, I want to acknowledge my mother. My mother's sitting up there in the gallery. She's in the front row there. I'm not sure which photo you're holding, Mum, but I just want to acknowledge you, Te Arorangi Kate Kraitiana Apanui, who married Angati Pro, my dad, and he took her away from Masterton and kept her away for some years, about 30 or 40 years. And when he passed in 1997, he chose to be buried at Akura Marae, Akura Urupā, Mr Speaker. And so he took her away and he brought her back. And on her arrival back to Masterton, Uncle Cookie and Auntie Hoagie grabbed her and said, "You're going to be part and parcel of this, Mum." I want to also acknowledge Sandra Edmonds, my cousin sitting up in that gallery over there. She came along with Mum this morning, and good luck to you for that, Tom, because you know, sometimes Mum can get a bit hard to handle, but no doubt you can handle it. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge another kuia from Masterton, Hinero Te Tau, also in the gallery up here, Mr Speaker. And together her and Mum are the eldest kuia from the Wairarapa contingent here and in Masterton, Mr Speaker. I now want to turn in and thank Rangitane for hosting us at Makirikiri Marae recently with the signing of the deed when I accompanied the Minister. And yes, it was wet, it was windy, but it was warm inside, and the day was a great day, no matter what. I figured that the wet was the tears of our tupuna, and the wind was the gentle breeze from our tupuna as well, blessing the day. Mr Speaker, as people have said, and previous speakers have said, confiscation is dreadful. It's a horrible, horrible thing that our people have suffered over the many years. And, but you know, we've kind of turned a corner here. And the Minister has said many times in many of his speeches that the financial redress is never ever going to be the big bulk of money that people think it's going to be. But, you know, for me, it's never ever about how much you get, it's actually what you do with it. And I think that 32.5 million is a pretty good start for Rangitane Tūmaira. I think it's a pretty good start because there's so many things that you can invest in into the future. And as a member of the Māori Affairs Select Committee, I look forward to having this bill come to us. I look forward to hearing all the kōrero that's going to come through, all the submissions. Might be only one yet, but from the submissions that we will hear. And Mr Speaker, I don't want to take up any more time of the House or your time, whānau, and so I stand and I proudly support this bill and commend it to the House. Kia ora.
I call Peter Peroni. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, tēnā no tātou i te whare. Tēnā hoki koutou ngā manuhiri i tai mai nei ki te tautoko te pire. Ki te atu i a koutou, harakau i mohina te nuinga i a koutou, engari ngā hunga i mohina a koro me tana hoa rangatira a Mavis. Nā reira, tēnā koutou. Tēnā hoki koutou i hāpaingia te kaupapa o te pire nei, kia haka whiriwhiring ia tātou i roto te whare pāremata i te rānei. Nā reira, tēnā koutou. Tēnā hoki e te whaia o te tuahine a Joe. Ngā mihi hoki ki a koe, engari arohanau ki tō tamahine, e noho ana ki i tērā taha, ko tāna taha tika i tēnei taha, kia hatia. Engari ngā mihi hoki ki a koe e te whaia. Mr Speaker, I want to first of all congratulate the people of Rangatani Tūmaira, Wairapa Tamaki Nui Arua claimants for bringing their claim to this stage. Although we have some way to go before everything is completed, but I think it's worth acknowledging those who have made the effort, and I'm sure against some strong criticism within their own iwi to this settlement. I also want to reiterate the point that was made by the Minister, that this settlement will not fully compensate the iwi. And it's no different from all other settlements that have been concluded in this House. And for whatever reason, that is the reality of claims, sir. And I just want to have that put on record, given that there are members in the wider community who are very critical of these settlements. They think that Māori are getting more than what they are entitled to, and yet if they read the history of the claims and the reasons for making those claims, then I'm sure their own opinion will change. But then there will be others within the community. It doesn't matter how many facts you present them, they will still have a contrary view. And so I support the notion of this bill being referred to the Select Committee, because it will give the opportunity for members of the iwi, particularly those who might not support the settlement in its present form. And so it will give the opportunity of the committee to hear the background for their dissent, if any, and the rationale for it, and whether or not those concerns can be addressed. I just want to run over some of the details of the settlement itself. And in so doing, I note that in terms of the area of interest, it is the second largest land area behind that of Ngai Tahu. So that just goes to show that the responsibility that those who have carried this bill to this stage have the size of the load that they've had to bear. And just by way of explanation, the area that is covered in this settlement extends from the north of Danevert to Mākaramu, near Porangahau, down to Turakirai, which is Cape Palliser, and encompasses the wider Wairapa and Tamaki Nui Arua regions. So there in itself, Mr. Speaker, gives you an indication of the land mass in which this iwi is certainly responsible for. The settlement summary describes a series of land transactions, including public work takings, by which Rangitane or Manawatu, who had initially encouraged European settlement and enjoyed considerable benefits from rents and trade, became virtually landless. Today, approximately 2% of the region is owned under a Maori land title. And the settlement includes the vesting of 8 sites in Rangitane, and under other arrangements, the vesting of another 5 sites, one of which, Pukaha, or Mount Bruce, is to be gifted back to the Crown. And again, I want to remind the wider public of New Zealand that this is just a mere example of the generosity of what iwi claimants make to our community. The settlement also includes the establishment of and provisions for participation in the Manawatu River Advisory Board and the Wairarapa Moana Statutory Board. Now, I just want to extend the comments made by the member from the Green Party in terms of Maori contribution to our environment. And I have no doubt that as part of this settlement, that the contribution of the iwi to the care of the Manawatu River and any other of its tributaries will certainly be an asset to the wider community. Mr. Speaker, the financial redress is not too bad, but could have been better. But it includes interest, less any on-account payments and commercial redress values. And I won't go into detail as to what those on-account payments were, but suffice to say that they were included in the overall quantum to meet the financial redress under this claim. There was also a right to purchase some Ngaumu forest land and some commercial sites in the Treaty Settlement Land Bank, and right of first refusal over some properties for 174 years. And I know that there has been some discussion about that length of period, particularly within the Maori Affairs Select Committee. And I'm sure that if we as Māori continue our oral tradition, then you can rest assured that the Māori partner in this treaty settlement will certainly not forget this commitment even after 174 years. So it's important that that becomes a topic of discussion within iwi circles, but it would be certainly helpful if the wider community also kept the record of that commitment. Mr. Speaker, like all other iwi, there's been trials and tribulations that the negotiators have had to endure in negotiating this settlement. And I'm sure that both parties know that it could have been more, but they would have liked to have increased the value, the quantum of the settlement, but for various reasons haven't been able to do so. And so in that respect, we have to acknowledge the generosity of the iwi in accepting the terms that have been offered them. Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to this House. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Louisa Wall.
Tēnā koe te māngai o te whare, i ngā mana i ngā reo rangatirama, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ngā uri o Rangitane tūmai rā, Wairarapa Tāmaki Nui a Rua, ngā hapu, Ngāti Hamua, Ngāti Tirangi Whakaewa, Ngāti Mutuahi, Ngāti Pakapaka, Ngāti Parakiore, Ngai Tamahau, Ngāti Te Reitea, Hine Te Ao Rangi, Ngāti Te Noti, Ngāti Te Whātui, Ngāti Tanga Tākau, Ngāti Manga Mātangi Uru, Ngāti Te Hina o Ngāti Te Hina Ariki, Ngāti Te Koro o ngā whenua, Ngāti Te Rangi Tōtohu, Ngāti Rua Tōtara, Te Kapua Rangi, Ngāti Mate Tapu, Ngāti Whakawehe, Ngāti Taimahu, Ngāti Tūkoko, Ngāti Te Atawha, Ngāti Te Whakamana, Ngāti Meroiti, Ngāti Hine Tauira, Ngāti Tau Iao, Ngāti Moi, Ngai Tahu, o Ngai Tahu Mākaka Nui, Te Hika a Papauma. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'd also like to acknowledge, I guess, the origins of this treaty settlement. When we think about the 1975 Treaty of Waitangi Act, the 1985 amendment that enabled us then to go back to 1840, there are some Wai claimants that I too would like to acknowledge. And those people are Y166, Manahi Pawai on behalf of Rangitane o Tamaki Nui Arui Incorporated Society. Y171, Henare Matua Kani on behalf of descendants of Henare Matua. Y175, James Rimene in Piriniha Te Tau on behalf of Rangitane o Wairarapa Incorporated Society. Y943, Lance Tuia Rangi Ratima on behalf of the descendants of Horomona Ratima. Y1008, Kirili Jan Anaru on behalf of the descendants of Pāhira Anaru. Y1634, Hepa Tātere, Manahi Pāwai and Louis Pāwai. And Y1950 under the name of Jocelyn Patterson. I acknowledge these people because they started this process so many years ago. And in addition to these Wai claimants, we also have some overlapping claims which relate to Rangitane o Wairarapa and Rangitane o Tamaki Nui Arua, and they are Y97, Y161, Y420, Y657, Y741, Y770, Y1568, Y1928, Y2211, Y2213, Y2225, Y2241 and Y2269. So the whānau have, through these Y claims, created an opportunity to negotiate with Crown. And so this bill gives effect to the deed of settlement signed on the 6th of August 2016, in which the Crown and Rangitane o Wairarapa and Rangitane o Tamaki Nui Arua agreed to the final settlement of the historic Treaty of Waitangi claims. So today is an incredibly special day, and so I'd like to acknowledge all the whānau that are here in the House and all the whānau that aren't here, because I know at times like this we remember the past as we always focus on the future, and there'll be people that aren't here anymore. And I've probably made a few people cry because I feel like crying myself as we remember our tūpuna who fought so hard and so long for this day. In preparing for today, I got a piece of research, and I want to refer to an extract of a letter that Judge Wainwright wrote about the Wairarapa ki Tararua report. And she wrote this to the Minister and these were the key points from her perspective. And so they were that this is a historically complex and difficult relationship between Ngāti Kahungunu and Rangitane, that the severe loss of te reo Māori in the district needed to be highlighted, that there was vulnerability of many important Māori heritage sites, that it was important to recognise Māori rights in and around the Wairarapa Moana, and that the rapid pace at which the Crown purchased the significant tracts of Māori land left the claimants landless, and the ongoing struggles the claimants have in terms of being able to meaningfully engage and to have any influence on what goes on in their rohe. I'd also like to highlight the issue of becoming virtually landless meant we couldn't maintain our tradition, we couldn't live communally. And so as a result of that, we lost our traditional homes, our customary knowledge and our language. And what I want to highlight about this bill that's before us today is if you read through it, it's intermixed, te reo and Pākehā in English. I'm not sure if the whānau have seen it, but all throughout the bill, you have the Māori text and then you have the Pākehā text. And so I want to acknowledge that this is a bilingual bill, and it really is quite significant in terms of the prioritisation, I think, of rangitane tū mai rā, to that impact on our cultural identity. So having a piece of legislation that is both in te reo and in Pākehā, I think, is incredibly important, and it's an incredibly symbolic sign in terms of how you see yourselves going forward. Because it wouldn't be wonderful if we could all read this in te reo and in English. And maybe that's the aspiration for the future, that we can have these texts like this in our schools, and our babies, our tamariki, can read it. So I haven't really got much more to add other than this piece of legislation is universally supported across the House. I hope that, Minister, we can have another expedited session where we can have some second readings, committee stages and third readings. I do think that it's really important, the work that you're doing. I do want to acknowledge you because the leadership that you've shown in prioritising these bills is something that I think not only the iwi appreciate, but actually we appreciate too. And so we stand with you 100% in the full resolution of all our treaty grievances. So nō reira, safe travels home whānau, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
A point of order, Joanne Hayes.
Thank you. I seek leave of the House to, once the speeches are completed for this bill and the waiata is sung, that we rise the House.
Okay, so the question is at the completion of the voting on this bill and the associated waiata that the House rise. Is there any objection to that? There appears to be none. That is agreed. Kelvin Davis.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.
You know, I was just hopeful.
Rangitāne, tēnā rā koutou. Tēnā rā koutou nau mai haere mai ki rota tēnei te whare o te motu. Hari ko ana mātou te kete i a koutou kei raro i te tuanui, nā reira nau mai haere mai whakatau mai. E manahi, tēnei haumihi atu kia koe. Mahara ake ahau, te taima i kawe atu ahau i tōku kaihana Nathan Davis ki Waingani o koutou hei prihi mana mo te taone o Dannevirke. Hore kau i te mōhio mehe mea he prihi mana pai kore take rānei. Mehe mea kei te oro tonu kua kaingatia i a koutou rānei. Engari, ko pai taku tāinga atu ki Waingani o koutou, nā reira tēnā rā koe e manahi. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to acknowledge Rangitāne for being here today in the House of the People, and I just like to acknowledge Manahi Paiwai up there. It was, again, when I got booted out of Parliament in 2011 and had a bit of spare time on my hands, my cousin Nathan Davis was appointed the police sergeant, I think, in Dannevirke, and so I and others of the whānau went down and had the pleasure of being hosted by Rangitāne in Dannevirke. And as I said, I wouldn't know whether he's a good cop or a bad cop, or whether he's still alive or whether they ate him. But so be it. He's your guy's problem now. Mr. Speaker, I just want to go over a bit of the history of the claim, and I see that in 2004 things really started around the Waitangi Tribunal. There were a series of meetings and a report was written. Now, so 2004, in March of 2004, this process sort of kicked off, and now we're in 2016. And we have to acknowledge the length of time that it took to get to this stage now where Rangitāne are almost at the finishing line. And I'd just like you all to consider this, and I would appreciate that your this process has probably worn you out, and there's people that have started the journey and aren't here to finish the journey. But just in those evenings when you're exhausted and tired and thinking we're almost at the end of the process, just to lift your spirits, all you need to say is, thank God we're not Ngāpuhi. Because our journey has been just as long and difficult and fraught, and we're not even at the starting line. Well, we're about 2 inches from the starting line. We've been running the race for 8 years, and we're 2 inches just from the starting line, but that could all be, we could be putting the car into reverse and backing backwards if things don't work out in the next 24 hours or so, Minister. You know, and what a different place New Zealand was in 2004. Helen Clark was the Prime Minister, the English were the Rugby World Cup champions, and I had dark hair.
And you were skinny.
And I was skinny. I thought the Speaker wasn't allowed to be brought into the debate, but he couldn't help himself there. Mr. Speaker, everyone has traversed, I won't say transgressed, as Nathan Guy said yesterday, traversed the issues around the Rangitane settlement. And reading through the bill, what strikes me again, and it strikes me in just about every bill, is the significant land loss that occurred. And when I say significant, it was the Mangatainoka block in particular, not because of the landmark there that I see when I drive past Mangatainoka, but in Mangatainoka there were significant land holdings, over 60,000 acres. The Crown applied pressure to purchase this land, even though the recognised leaders of Rangitane opposed the sale. By 1890, from between 1877 and 1890, the Crown had acquired over 85% of the Mangatainoka block. Today, less than 1% of the original block remains in Māori land title. And we should never, ever underestimate the impact, the cultural impact, the economic impact, the impact in just about every facet of the people's lives that landlessness has impacted on them. It's happened all around New Zealand. And again, you know, that's why these settlements are so significant, why they are so important, because we need to start turning that around, reversing those impacts. And again, you know, any quantum is just going to be a fraction of what is owed. It's only going to be a fraction of what is lost. But we need to, and we need to keep that in the forefront of our minds, because again, there'll be people out there in the country saying, oh, look at what all these Māoris are getting. They've got their hands out and they're going to get all these millions of dollars, and it's all, you know, what a waste of money. We've got to stop focusing on what's being returned. We've got to look at how much was lost and keep that in perspective. It is so important. Rangitane, back in the day, around the mid-1840s, enjoyed considerable benefits from the annual rents and trade with new arrivals who leased large areas of land. The Crown applied pressure on Wairarapa Māori to end the leases and to sell their lands. So here they were, they had leases, they were leasing up the land, they were basically being businessmen, entrepreneurs, doing what people do in a strong economy. But through the pressure of the Crown, that all went. In 1853, between 1853 and 84, the Crown acquired about 1.5 million acres of land. Now, earlier today I was talking about how much land Taranaki lost, 1.2 million acres. Rangitane, and I said in the earlier debate, 1.2 million acres, if we just divided those into quarter-acre sections, there would be enough quarter-acre sections to have a house for every man, woman and child in New Zealand. And yet, Rangitane lost more than Taranaki. 1.5 million acres. So just today we've been talking about close to 3 million acres of Māori land that has been confiscated or removed from Māori possession. Imagine what Māori could be achieving if we had those 3 million acres now in our possession. That 1.5 million acres was 60% of all Rangitania land. Now we need to let these figures sink in and to just realise and appreciate the enormity of the loss for Rangitania. Mr. Speaker, I would again just like to acknowledge the people in the gallery and all the other tribes that have been here today, and the hope is that all of these bills move through the House quickly so that the people can get on with actually creating the success that we should have had over the last 170 odd years. And might I say, and I'll get down on my hands and knees tonight and pray that my whanaunga up in Ngāpuhi do the right thing and follow the lead that the tribes have done today and just get on with the process of settling their claims and being successful Māori, taking charge of our own destinies. Nā reira tātou mā, huri rauna I te whare, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Alistair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there's an advantage in being the last speaker in the House because one has heard much of the story, so I don't want to repeat much of what is said, but I will repeat some stuff. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the people of Rangitania, particularly these people that have arrived today. And I note the photographs of those who have passed, those who have started the process, who are not able to be here, and I acknowledge you here today. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Mākirikiri Marae. Minister Finlayson mentioned the auspicious occasion where we were on the marae and signed the agreement. And I was extremely honoured to be a witness to the Minister's signature. And I really appreciated your invitation, your hospitality, and your heartfelt involvement and commitment to the process. And I could see at that marae on the day, as some have already said, the relief that came off your shoulders on that day when the signatures were inevitably signed. So I'd like to also, being one of the last, it gives me an opportunity to correct a few things that had been said in the House. So Katie Apanui, mother of Joe, you have done a fantastic job. No matter what Pita Paroni says about being on the right side and the wrong side of the House, I say she is definitely on the right side of the House. So thank you for bringing up such a fantastic lady. She does a great job on this side of the House. Congratulations, you should be proud of your daughter. Mr. Speaker, some of the history has been laid out very eloquently by the Minister. Kelvin Davis has given a little more of the history. But at the end of the day, sir, these people were ripped off. That's the bottom line. They were ripped off. So when people say, what are we doing giving Māori more money? They've got their hand out. They've always got their bloody hand out. I say, well, come on, think about the story, think about the history, think about the reality, think about the facts behind this settlement that we're talking about today and other settlements that we've talked about today. Think about what would happen if your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, think about your great-grandmother. She might have been, let's just say she's in a rest home right now, and someone stole everything that she had. Someone stole everything. Everything. Not just a little bit, not just half, but everything. And so that is what has happened for these people, sir, when they became virtually landless, when the properties that they had, 3 million odd acres, 1.5 million disappearing in one hit, these people were ripped off. They became landless. They had nothing. So it is amazing the generosity and the spirit that I have witnessed on the Mākirikiri Marae and in other places with these people, sir, that are demonstrating their generosity, their determination to get through this process, their graciousness in accepting this settlement. As been mentioned before, the numbers just don't do any justice to the rip-off that occurred. It is a symbol, and can I acknowledge the symbolism of Pukaha Mount Bruce, sir? So part of the settlement involves 900 hectares of a fantastic conservation area known as Pukaha Mount Bruce, a large piece of land. But it is with massive, huge generosity and sacrifice and graciousness, I would say, that Rangatahi have gifted it back to the Crown, instantly, without thought. And that is a very significant contribution, culturally, but spiritually, but not economically. The numbers don't matter, the dollars don't count, because more importantly is the restoration of mana for Rangatahi in around Mount Bruce, Pukaha, as being their place, their tūranga waiwai, their place where they can rest their feet, to say that this is our place. So that is much more important than dollars and cents. Okay, we've got some money involved. We're going to invest that wisely and sensibly. And can I say, sir, that having heard some of the next generation, some of the younger people that were involved on the marae on the day, the Rangatahi can only look forward to a very positive future, because the young people that spoke on that day, you should be very proud of those young people. They are committed. They have the same spirit, the same drive that you and the people before you have demonstrated. So people talk about young people being, young and hopeless and wayward and useless, some people. But these people that I saw on the marae were very proud to be Rangatahi and very clearly very capable and very committed. So those who have passed will, of course, understand that it is about the future, and I can absolutely suggest and commend your youth, your young people, your Rangatahi, that will drive the future of Rangatahi well into the future. Mr. Speaker, I don't have too much more to say, except that I would like to, on behalf of the Wairarapa people, Rangatahi, and Lewis Wall has already acknowledged you, sir, your contribution to getting this settlement through, your innovative approach, and I know with Rangatahi and Kahanunu there was a lot of innovation that had to take place to enable these settlements to come to the House. So again, it's all about thinking outside the box, outside the square, and I congratulate you for collaborating with Kahanunu to ensure that these settlements are before the House and that they will become, done and dusted, as they say. Here in the first reading, it's part of the journey, but we can be confident, as you've heard through the House today, that we will progress quickly and effectively. So be assured that that will be the case. So congratulations on your collaboration with Kahanunu. That's very important. Mr. Speaker, it is an honour and a pleasure to be the last speaker on this House, in the House to speak on this bill, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the motion is agreed to. Those that are of that opinion will say aye. Aye. The contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it.
Rangatane Tūmaira, Wairarapa Tamaki Nui Arua, Claims Settlement Bill, first reading.
The question is that the Rangatane Tūmaira Wairarapa Tamaki Nui Arua Claims Settlement Bill be considered by the Māori Affairs Committee. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I understand that we are to receive a treat. Thank you. Before I adjourn the House pursuant to the leave that was taken previously, I do just want to acknowledge that this will be the last time that Kevin Haig is with us, and to acknowledge him and thank him for making this Parliament a better place. The House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. on Tuesday the 11th of October 2016.
Live coverage from the House of Representatives has concluded. Coming up at 6 p.m. is a full repeat of today's proceedings. Question time will be replayed at 10 p.m. Live coverage from the House of Representatives has concluded. Coming up at 6 p.m. is a full repeat of today's proceedings. Question time will be replayed at 10 p.m.